Well, good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for being with us in the afternoon session. Always after lunch is a bit tougher, but always after lunch also the speakers are more nourishing. So we are going to have a very interesting collaboration and contribution from Dr. Chamunde Soare Kupuswamy. She's an interdisciplinary researcher with primary interests based in international law. Her research topics include global commons, commons governance, property rights, right to development, decolonizing international law, common heritage of mankind, access to medicines, patents, traditional knowledge, cultural heritage, bioethics, arts as method, and security. So, as you may understand from this list of topics, her research interests are very wide. I think I have hardly ever met a scholar with such a passion for different paths of knowledge and such a big talent to manage to gather them all together in meaningful ways. So I am really very glad she is here with us. And her contribution to this symposium this afternoon is titled Devadasi Property Ownership, Understanding Customary System of Land Ownership in India and its Relevance to Development Goals. Please.
Right, thank you very much, Wendy. And yes, thank you very much for being here today. I'm going to try and speak as slowly as I can. Okay. The land is the free gift of the gods. The English did not bring it with them in their ships, did they? The country belongs to its inhabitants, who were placed in it by the gods. The English did not. The English understood this well enough in their own country. Why have the Hindus and Mohammedan laws then been interfered with and overturned? This is a very small excerpt from a book called The Young Zamindar, written by Shushi Chandar Dutt. And this was in the early 19th century. And he was one of the first Indian writers in English. And I got hold of a copy of it because the Indian Academy of Literature, Sahitya Academy, then did a reprint of it in what they call the Rare Book series. So it's quite significant, I think, in many ways. I think there are sort of three key concepts that you can take away from this very short paragraph. There's a reference to the land, yeah, and there's a reference to the country, and there's a reference to Hindu and Mohammedan laws. So from that, I abstract it as the country referring to territory, and then the land referring to the land. We all know what it looks like. It's very much a tangible thing. At the moment we're all sitting on it, our buildings are, so it's a very present thing. Whereas territory is quite a construction. Yeah, it's actually land, but it's the perspective in which you look at it. And then, slightly more complicated to understand is the notion of custom. Yeah, especially identifying custom is actually quite difficult. So let's look at the first two terms then, territory and land. Yeah. So we understand land. We understand it as a geographical entity. We understand it as a physical thing. Yeah. But let's say from a legal point of view, we also have the same term land, but our engagement with the concept of land becomes quite different. Now here is where I want to introduce two different concepts based on the physical land itself, is that if it is from a national legal point of view, okay, let's take the example of Mexico, then you and me, not me I think, you can buy property over here, okay? So that means you're having certain rights over whatever you have bought, yeah? Now when the Spanish first set foot over here, it's the same land, okay, which perhaps in very similar ways to how you own land now, was owned by somebody who was living in that, was it Yucatan when they first came? The Spanish, is it? Okay, so at that point someone would have actually had that land, but for them, they looked at it as territory. Okay, so from an international law point of view, whatever we call as land becomes the term territory. Okay, so that's something quite important and relevant in the context of how countries cooperate with each other and to what extent countries can persuade other countries to do some things on their land. And I think a very good example, since I'm in Mexico, is your wall. Okay? Another country was asking you to build a physical structure. Was it in your territory, or was it like half in US territory and half in your territory? Where exactly was the wall going to be built or proposed? Yeah? So that's quite an important thing to actually look at. Exactly whose land, where are those 2 or 3 bricks going to be laid? Which part of the border? So yeah, don't pay here before. But that's just an example of how the same physical thing in law actually has different conceptions. Now, why is it important to sort of look at land, to look at, to understand this physical entity as different concepts? It's important because the way we connect with land is very different to the way we connect with territory. So when you buy a piece of land, it's your private property and you have rights and duties over it. So you have a right, for example, to use it the way you like. You can make a house or you can grow crops in it. But you also have a responsibility to make sure that you are not building a nuclear facility or you are not bombing the whole place. There are some responsibilities that you have attached to it. But similarly, you don't have the same as far as territory is concerned, because as a private individual, land is only land to you. All right? But let's say politics then enters into the whole thing. Yeah? In that case, what happens is that the meanings of these, or the concepts that get picked up, become narrow. Right? It may be your land, but let us say, let's take the example of the 1990 war between the world and Iraq. Yeah, so we know what happened then. There was Iraq, there was Kuwait, 2 different countries, and Iraq essentially sent troops to go into Kuwait. And what they did was they went from one land to another. They went from one territory to another. Okay. So for them, it was purely a territorial acquisition. And territory is super important in the context of countries. Okay, because in international law, one of the 4 requirements for being a nation state is that you have to have a territory. Yeah, you have to have a population, you have to have a territory. You need to be able to have a government to govern it. So with that sort of background setting, yeah, because my talk is really about critically looking at how rights and obligations are divided on land, and also how division of these rights and obligations will contribute to development goals. Okay, let me go back to that 3rd term that I started putting out there, which is custom. Yeah, and I'm going to stay with that paragraph from Shushi Chandra Dutt. So the context there is about English colonization or British colonization of Indian territory. Yeah, and it wasn't technically Indian territory because at that time they were all different kingdoms which only in around 1947 came together as India. But for ease, I'm just going to refer to it as India. Right? So when you take custom, yeah, there was a reference in that quote on Hindu and Mohammedan laws have been interfered with and overturned. So there was Hindu and Mohammedan laws, and the English took over the territory, and then they replaced the English and the Mohammedan laws with English law. Okay, so that's the context. Now custom customs can be of, various types. If in your family you had a long tradition of eating a particular thing, that's also called a custom. Yeah. So there's customs for everything. So similarly, in law, we also have something called custom or customary law. And what I'm referring to when I talk about custom is in the context, legal context. So I'm talking about customary laws, right? So what I'm trying to get at now is what exactly is customary law. Yeah. So as far as the Hindu is concerned, I'm just taking an example, okay? It could be Christian, it could be Mohammedan, it could be Jain, it could be maybe atheist. I'm not sure. I haven't thought about it that way. But let's just look at, customary laws from the perspective of how it's divided according to religion. So for a Hindu, English law is customary law of the English, okay? But for the English, Hindu law is customary law of the Hindu. So this is a very simple concept to understand, yeah? If there are this many divisions, then if you have a custom that you can identify for a particular group, then you call it the customary laws of that group, right? But enter politics. And this is what actually happened in the last 300 years, and this is what I'm investigating in all of this whole paper itself, is that when the English came into India, Hindu and Mohammedan laws, this was the largest population, okay, became customary law, and law, as in just law, became English law, right? So now you can see the shift from from two different customary laws, right, interacting with each other, and because of power, one of them becomes the law and the other becomes relegated to the customary law. Okay, so that is sort of where we have arrived in the history of land ownership in India in the last 300-400 years. Yeah, and I'm looking at the moment only at 300-400 years for this current two slides, because that's where we have the most history and records, yeah, to be able to make a clear analysis and come to a clear conclusion about how customary laws have actually changed and morphed. Okay, so keep that now to one side, and I'm going to take you to the second part of my topic, which is about why am I interested, as a lawyer and as someone who is interested in looking at achievement of different human rights of peoples around the world. Why am I interested in looking at customary laws? Why do I think it's actually important? I think it's important because it's relevant to the development goals. And I'm referring to development goals broadly, but also to the development goals that have been set from 2015 onwards. So the United Nations General Assembly has a set of 17 goals called Sustainable Development Goals, or SDGs. Okay, and within the Sustainable Development Goals, one of them, Sustainable Development Goal 1, is about removing people from extreme poverty by 2030. Okay, and one way in which you can remove people from extreme poverty is to enable them to have wealth. And one of the easiest ways of doing that is to be able to get them to have land ownership. Okay. And often it happens that they might have ownership, but they might not have any rights over it. Yeah, they might just be having a house and they won't have any title, or they won't have any, they probably won't have any paper to prove that they have. So there is lots of different reasons why making sure that formal rights over land are recognized so that the Sustainable Development Goal 1 is achieved. But also that the commentators as well as statesmen and stateswomen look at land as something that's relevant for achieving of the other 16 goals as well. So for example, goal number 5 is on gender equality. And one of the most unequal areas between genders is ownership of assets, including land. Okay, and ownership can also mean access. So for example, forests, I don't own a forest, but I have a certain right to go into a forest for a certain purpose. So that is a part of an ownership right, okay? Because ownership as such is a bundle of rights. And there is a lot of literature that comes out of the Americas on, different types of ownership, right across the spectrum, from monopolistic private ownership to complete communal, communitarian, joint ownership. And by joint ownership, it could literally be groups going up to the thousands. Okay, so if you imagine pasture lands for grazing, yeah, So that's an example of joint ownership or common ownership. So I'll take you back to where I stopped on this slide, which is I talked to you about, why studying customary law is important for me for achievement of human rights, right? Now, it may be important to me, but is that in any particular way relevant to the international community? Is the international agenda in any way looking at this? Yeah. So, for example, are all the states in the United Nations General Assembly or any of the international organizations? Yeah, it could be UNESCO, it could be Food and Agriculture. So that's what is there in my last part of this slide, which is that the Food and Agriculture Organization has a committee called the Committee on World Food Security. And in 2012, they produced an international instrument. It's not a treaty yet, but it has been incorporated in various ways into national law and policy. So it's something that is used as a benchmark by many governments around the world to measure whether they are achieving development goals. So it's got quite a lot of, if you like, persuasive value, okay, even though it's not a treaty as such. So this is called the VGGT. I didn't put the expansion over here, we can discuss that later. The VGGT essentially says, and this is the first ever instrument in the history of international law to talk directly about land and governance. Yeah. Now, why is it the first ever international instrument? Land has been there ever since, we've ever been there. That's because land is equal to territory, is equal to, it's a sovereign issue of the government, okay? It's a sovereign issue of states. International law, if it interferes with land matters, it means it's interfering with the independence and autonomy of a nation state. So it goes against the grain of international law to actually put out an international law instrument which says this is how the government should deal with their land. The government should actually give all the indigenous people and tribal people 5 acres of land. They cannot say that in international law because you're essentially legislating, yeah, undemocratically legislating from the outside for matters that are purely reserved for internal matters, okay? That is a huge leap now. The fact that in 2012, all of the members of the Food and Agricultural Organization, which is equivalent to the membership of the United Nations, that's about 200 plus members, did come around the table and say, we are committing ourselves to what's called responsible governance of land. Okay? So we are going to look at how, together as a whole, we have put together these principles. We're going to look at how, in our countries, we are responding to governance. Now, there's another very interesting part in terms of part to discuss, which again is not part of this paper, but I'll throw it out here because it's quite interesting, and who knows, because we are such an interdisciplinary group, you might be interested in that part. The word responsible governance is very important, yeah? And for those of you who might have come across, international aid or development programs by the World Bank and all of that, the term that's used is good governance over there, okay? Now, there's a huge difference between good governance and responsible governance. Good governance is about saying what is good. It's about flying in an expert from the UK into India to say this is how your rivers should be managed. This is how your water problem should be managed. Whereas responsible governance is actually to say, you know best what to do, what's suitable, and do it. And the instrument goes even further to say, no, the government doesn't know best. The people who have managed these lands know best. The cow herds and the goat herds and the sheep herds that have been managing pasture land since ancient times know how to regenerate that land and how to be able to contribute to food security. So all of this is captured within the concept of responsible governance. And the VGGT stands exactly for this. It's voluntary guidelines for the governance of responsible governance of tenure, of land, forests and fisheries in the context of national food security. It's a huge title. That's why I didn't put the whole thing there. Anyway, so the long and short of that little discussion there was that the international agenda is valuing customary rights and is basically giving a nod to say that if every effort government takes to ensure customary rights are secure, informal rights are secure, will contribute directly to the achievement of sustainable development goals by 2030. Okay, so that's a huge step. So this then leaves room for policymakers, for us academics, to take this on board and to see what actually needs to be changed in order to make sure that land, for example, is not grabbed by anybody who wants to buy large tracts of land to do intensive agriculture. It's very important that your Kenyan woman having 1 acre of land does that traditional form of rotatory agriculture, or your Ethiopian man grazing the pasture lands is actually able to follow what he has done for a long period of time, and that needs to be secured. Okay, and the law in Ethiopia, the law in Kenya, the law in Mexico should be responsive to VGGT. Okay, in all of this, I was going to then set what is the customary. Central government, which is in New Delhi. We have a constitution, and then in the constitution we have an arrangement whereby there are 3 lists. One is called a union list, another is called a state list, another is called a concurrent list. And these lists are all about what laws can be made. If it says a union list, if there is a matter in the union list, let's say army, that means only the central government can make law in that area of army. State list, land is a state list matter. Only states can actually make laws relating to land. And then concurrent list, we have a small number of themes where state and central can work together to make the laws. Okay. Now, this is both an advantage from the perspective of customary law, because custom is very local. Yeah, you know the custom in your family, you know the custom in your region, you know the custom maybe not beyond that unless you study it. Okay, so it's very good for customary law that land is a state matter in the Constitution of India. Okay, and I have been studying the customary laws in the current, state of Tamil Nadu, which is a state that was formed since, independence. And before that, it was called the Madras state, which actually included parts of other states. I'll show you. I think I have a map. Ah, there we are. That red bit there at the bottom, which is the Coromandel coast, which is on the eastern side. So the western is the Malabar coast, that is Kerala and all that, and eastern is the Coromandel coast, right? So that whole thing is the current state of Tamil Nadu, right? And however, when it comes to custom, the region changes according to the time period you're looking at. So let us say that I'm looking at from 100 BC onwards, then the region will come nearly, I think about 2.5 times that red region that is marked over here now. So all of the region up to there. So generally, the area that is covered to study custom will be the whole of the peninsular India. Okay, and we're sort of talking about the 4 southern states, which often again are grouped together, and even now they actually stand up together as well. They all have different languages and they all have different cultures and everything. However, there's been a lot of give and take, obviously because of geographical proximity. Okay, in that case, I've now set up, when I talk about custom, I'm talking particularly about state, and I'm particularly talking about the arrangements for land transfer, land ownership, land sale, land use within that. So I just thought I'll briefly introduce you to what the current system, and this is a very, very basic introduction because it's a very complex and technical field, land ownership. I just have tried to give you a picture so that you can see what are the different categories of land ownership and whether in current law of Tamil Nadu there is any scope where customary rights are recognized. Then if it's recognized, we can say how well is it recognized and is it responsibly governed, and then we can, tick mark and probably give the Nobel Prize to the Chief Minister or something for having really done it well. If it's not, then we have to look at, we know it's important by now. We know it's important because I'm interested in it. We know it's important because the international community has said that it's very important. So for all reasons, it's important. And if it's not actually recognized by the current law of Tamil Nadu, there's a good reason why it has to be. Okay, because it'll be good for women, it'll be good for indigenous people, it'll be good for food security, it'll be good for environment, all of those development goals that are mentioned in the 17 SDGs. Okay, so just to give you a lowdown, I do own property in Tamil Nadu, by the way. I have a title, okay? So that means I have a document which basically says I bought it from this person, and it includes this size, it includes everything. So we're talking about a title deed, yeah? Unfortunately, I don't speak any Spanish or read any Spanish, otherwise I could have found out. Maybe this is for next time, what it's actually called, equivalent over here. Then we have something called a patta. Now a patta is a public-private thing. So a patta is a certificate that you get saying that the government knows you have this land. Okay? So first is that I bought it from everything and I have the title deed. But then nobody else knows I have this unless I show them that. Okay, and if I lose this, then I actually don't have anything to prove that I have a title deed. I'll take this title deed, register it at the local collectorate, then I'll be given a registration certificate, and that's called a patta. That means the government has a record of it and anybody else can access and have a look at it. And in the wonderful 21st century under the Modi regime, it's all about digitization. So actually, if I connect to the internet now over here, I can show you my patta and my title, apparently. But the site is always down. Don't ask me why. You have the best, computer scientists in India, and they make websites for, IBM and whoever, but the government of Tamil Nadu website is down half of the time. And that's a huge problem. From a human rights lawyer perspective, it's about transparency. It's about making sure that I have access to all legal information. And that's not there. And that's quite serious, yeah? And they can't argue saying we don't have resources. You do have resources. You have electricity. You have the best, guys who work on the computer systems and design websites. So what's wrong? What's going on, okay? Anyway, what is a chitta? Chitta is, and this is quite interesting because it tells us something about monopolization. If I have more than one piece of land, yeah? I have one piece of land, that could be, let's say, land within the urban area. I could have one agricultural land. I could have one piece of land that is more for industrial use within a technology park. There are quite a few of those now. All of those collected together will be a chitta record. And this is very similar to a patta, but it's just a multiple of the patta. And it'll be, and let's say I have a land in Tamil Nadu, I have land in Karnataka, then I can bring that together as well. Right? So this is all in one place, so which is, and for certain things, it's quite important to plan, in terms of how rich I am, what's my wealth. It'd be important to have something like a chitta. TSLR, this is patta, but for agricultural land. Okay, it's just exactly the same, but the land use for it is very different. Okay. Now, one of the things I'm trying to look at is the origins of these. Yeah, title deed is fine. We know what it is. The word patta, for example, it'd be quite interesting to see whether there was any customary equivalent of it at all. And whether patta in the customary sense means exactly patta like what we call it now as well. Not something I have gone into yet, but it'll be very relevant to see when the system of patta actually started, what existed before it, giving us a clue of private land ownership before the records that we have now. The next two, I've left a gap and listed to you the Purambok land and Purambok Maikal land. It's quite interesting, and if you have people who are interested in language and words and how they might contribute to meaning and understanding of society, I'll give you an example of this Purambok. Okay, it's a Tamil word now, right? It's used, and in fact, it's also a swear word, and it's a derogatory word as well. But in the land context, it's not a swear word. So the word, what it means, Purambok, basically it means public lands. Okay, the government actually owns Purambok lands, and Purambok Maikal is Purumbok lands or public lands that is used for the particular purpose of pastures. Okay, and Purumbok land may not be used for anything. It's equivalent to land that is undeveloped, but that which belongs to public, to the public purse, and it can be used for development projects. Okay, now Purumbok Meka land is used specifically for grazing, and it's actually used by those who have a pastoral lifestyle. So cows. In North India, it could be camels. In South India, there's like ducks. So there's duck pastoralism, which is quite interesting. So that's the only difference between these two. Now, the word Purumbok, the word bok is nothing but a corruption of the word book. Okay? And Puram is actually a 2,500-year-old word for outside. Okay? Outside of. In fact, it's found a lot in Sangam literature as Puram and Aham. And Aham is inside, Puram is outside. The Sangam literature, which is about, the earliest is 2,500, and then you have even going before that a number of years. And it's a body of, literature, but it's also a body of governance, in terms of the material it has. It talks about governance in that period and everything. But, and Puram sort of comes from there. And if you put Puram and Bok then together, outside of the book, now what book are we talking about? The book that the British started to record revenues of agricultural land, right? So essentially, anything that was not considered productive for agriculture is what is called Purumbok. Yeah? So studying Purumbok and Purumbok Meka land, and to see whether the rights of, let's say, the pasture people on Purumbok Meka land has been preserved or not, tells us whether the government of Tamil Nadu gives enough importance to customary rights or not, right? So within this whole system of the current land ownership and governance, you already have some aspects of customary law. Okay, so that's the kind of conclusion I want to say from here. And Wendy, how much more time have I got? 10, 15. Okay, then I'll finish comfortably. Right, okay. That was the modern, system that we have. Now I'm going to talk to you a little bit about what do we have in custom. This is again a very broad brush, bird's eye view of the landscape of customary rights, but there are lots of gaps in it as well. And that's why it's interesting. We need to fill all those gaps. It's important to fill all those gaps. But we have some kind of material out in the literature, but even more material that's been buried in various different sources. It could be material that we can directly read, but we are not actually reading. Because as you can imagine, as a practicing lawyer, none of this is going to be relevant to me. Yeah. So most of the legal minds and legal brains don't necessarily go towards here. So you might actually have materials, libraries just waiting for you to look at, and we've not actually looked at it. Because we've not really thought about customary law, customary rules as being important for achievement of any of our current economic or social development or cultural goals. That's why. Okay. Anyway, so I think there is a lot of scope here. Spending, even a couple of weeks in the British Library gave me a lot of stuff. I, by the way, work in the UK, have been doing so for the last 18 years, but I also work in India, and I'm there almost every 5 months. So, and yes, it's much easier to work in the British Library than it is to get access to libraries in India, which is such a shame. And it might take a whole lifetime to actually even change that, let alone find out customary laws. Anyway, so in Tamil Nadu, I think we can divide it into sort of 4 chunks, how we look at customary land rights in Tamil Nadu. So first is kingly rights. Yeah, anything before 1000 AD, you can make sense of by understanding that all land ownership was with the king, okay, whoever might be the king. There is a lot of literature. One of the most interesting people to read on this is Dharma Kumar, and she has written talking about the fact that the term ownership itself is not the correct concept for what rights the kings had over the land. Yeah, so it's purely stewardship. Yeah. Is it patrimony? Or I think there's a word called something patrimony in Spanish as well, isn't there? So it's something that is much more, it's not about you controlling it, but it's you taking care of it. So around that. So kingly rights, the ownership at that point was only stewardship. Now you can look at that in two ways. One is because they decided that was the best way to have it. The other is because land per se was not actually of any value, because it was there. And remember that quote that Shoshi Chandra Dutt has. He says, the country was placed, the inhabitants were placed in it by the gods. So it's just there, okay, as a default. So that's why the kings just came and they never really bothered about land per se. And if you think about the population of the, of India, or the region called India, about before 1000 AD, it would have been very sparse. So it's not like how we have now in urban areas where we compete for land. It only becomes an asset when the competition is huge, right? When there is more demand than there is supply. So we can was of no value, and land was therefore also available for everyone, and the kings were the stewards. Okay. Then we can, from 1000 AD onwards, these kingly rights were being shared out in some way. So, for example, the kings had many advisors and all sorts of help. They valued the help they got from the priests. So when they were really happy, they would say, "Oh, you have the same rights as I have over this piece of land in this part of the kingdom." Okay. So then, the term mirasi right is a sort of a retrospective coinage of the sharing of kingly rights that came about. And I use the word mirasi right because, not because I know exactly what it means, yeah, but there are lots of different meanings to it that I have found in literature, and this is probably an umbrella term for different kinds of arrangements where people have certain rights over land. So it starts, is sort of the beginnings of your private land ownership concept. But I think it's quite far away though from private land ownership, because there were much, much more responsibilities attached to mirasi rights than there were rights. Okay. For example, the right of sale may not necessarily have been there at all as part of mirasi right. I mean, we recognize in our current private land ownership that I can sell my land whenever I want, and nothing stops me. There's no encumbrance. But mirasi right was not like that. But anyway, so the kings, when they shared it out with some other people, that we can look at as mirasi. So that progressed, yeah. And then we quickly sort of move on to the 1800s, yeah. And this was exactly the time that Shoshi Chandra Dutt was talking about. There were major changes. You mean enter a new power, and consolidation of power was by building of wealth. And one of the first things that the British did was get the rights of revenue. And revenue at that time, and even now, Tamil Nadu is 40% agricultural. Revenue then was probably much, much more in the 1800s, purely agricultural perhaps. But at the same time, I believe there was also, like cotton, for example, in terms of it being, of course it was grown in those parts, but there was a separate industry to make cloth, etc., out of cotton. So that would have been another source of revenue, source of tax that the British had at that time. But agricultural revenue was part of the mix. That was one of the agendas of the British. It was the East India Company as well as the Raj afterwards as well. So that is the point at which land was given any value, right? So the origins of private ownership of land in India really is as late as the 1800s, yeah, not even earlier than that. And I've coined this term saying if you want to study the ownership system before, it can only be studied by understanding what happened at the point of colonization. And what happened was, I call it IWO, inadvertent land ownership, right? So, and the system that they put in place, there were 3 systems that were put in place for the whole of India, but in Tamil Nadu, it was the Rayatwari system that was put in place. So the Rayatwari was slightly different to Zamindari, and so Shoshi Chandra Dutt was in North. He was actually Bengali, which was also where Rayatwari system was in place, but the neighboring states had the zamindari system. Most of India was covered by zamindari, and a very small part in the northwest was covered by mahalwari system. They were all different systems. The most progressive is the Raitwari system. And that is also because what the British found in southern India, in Tamil Nadu, in Andhra Pradesh, in Karnataka, Kerala, was that there was quite an advanced system of land stewardship that was going on. So Thomas Munro, who was the revenue policy head at that time, came up with his Raitwari system. And it gave quite a bit of rights compared to the other two systems to the local Indian people. Right, so then moving on to post-independence, 1947, we have, as far as property is concerned, for example, inheritance is completely covered by customary law. So we have a separate Hindu law, we have separate Mohammedan law, we have separate Christian law. And when I studied law school back in India, I studied all these, I studied Hindu law separately, it was all part of our syllabus. So it's very much, so this is definitely a recognition of the fact that customary laws related to land, it's not only land, matrimony also is covered by customary law completely in India, has a place in modern legal systems. Okay, so which I would say is like a tick when it comes to saying, does India recognize customary law in any way? It does, but then you have to look at the quality of what it does. You know, the devil, I suppose, is in the detail. Okay, I suppose then I come to the last part, which is, before going to that, I'm going to say, why am I looking at the example of the Devadasi? Now, has anybody heard of the word Devadasi before? You have? Okay, you have. So Devadasis are women, okay? And I'm looking at particular groups. Okay, I would like to look at many different groups, but I think looking at a group gives us the context and the meaning for, you know, why customary law could be important. Yeah, and I've chosen Devadasi because, you know, I outside of my legal life, I'm a dancer, and a Devadasi is a temple dancer. Okay, so I've come across it, sort of heard about it as I was growing up and everything. So I thought, well, you know, given that we academics have such less time, we have to somehow find ways in which we cut short our identification of topics and subjects. So it just fit in very well for me, you know, as I was reading literature on Devadasis and I was talking about ownership. So it came together, and it also happened that it was quite interesting when I presented it to some of my other law colleagues. So let's talk to you a little bit about the history of Devadasis. I'm not going to go very much into it at all. So this community of dancers us into the classical period in Tamil history in South India. I'm only dealing with the Tamil and the Tamil side of it, whereas there were other parts of India who also had dancing women, very similar. They were not called Devadasis, they were called very different names. Okay, and even Devadasi is a term that was, you know, has been coined later. In Tamil, they're called different things. So Devaraliyal is one of the words over there. So yeah, but anyway, we can, you know, call them Devadasis. And who were they actually? When it came to 100 BC, they were all professional bards. Poetry and song was what they were into. But poetry and song, such that it was an important part of the courtly life and also the chieftain's life. So they were very close. Okay, they were actually advisors who would deal with very esoteric topics and would directly have the ear of the king or the chief. Yeah, so their position is what actually makes them quite interesting in the context of, you know, studying land ownership. Then moving on from that period, looking at perhaps the Pallava period. There's been some work done on the kind of role that the women played, not only in courts and chieftains, but also in an ordinary village and in the community. The word Nitya Sumangali has been coined to call them, to understand what their role was in society. Now, they were involved in everything in terms of the life cycle. So if a child was born, they would be the auspicious symbol. If there was a death, they would be there. And they would be the sort of harbinger of everything good. Okay? They were also healing. So medicine was a huge part of what they actually did. Because they understood not just because they understood a lot of thinking. So poetry is linked to sort of our emotional side. Okay, so healing and emotion was a huge part of what they were involved in. Okay, and then of course, from the mental side, they also then started understanding the physical side as well. And some of them actually are recorded as being expert doctors, almost equivalent to the court physician at that time. And there are records of conversation between the court physician and the court dancer about what they do and how they heal. And in one of them in particular, is an interesting thing about how the court dancer talks about mental health a lot, and then you see the court physician talking about the physical health, and then they're looking at how both are actually both help each other. And I think for the court physician, it's more of a revelation as to how mental health actually affects physical health. Okay, I wouldn't be surprised that even in modern medicine, this huge division, if they bring it together, it might, make sense to bring it together. Anyway, so that was the. So they did play a role in the courts, in the chieftains, in also community as well. So they were not cut off from that. Medieval India, 700 years ago and onwards, they were quite powerful. Okay, because if you can one strand of it. We can extrapolate. The next interesting thing I'll refer to you is in the second paragraph about how the temple dancer, during the period of 1012 to 1044, for example, made large donations to the Tiruvarur temple. Okay? And which means they are now kind of occupying the place that we would think of as wealthy people now. So, I don't know, Bill Gates with his foundation has already been mentioned yesterday in terms of what kind of charitable activities they actually did. Yeah. So, you start then 2 points from that. One is that they were very accepted in society. And I have to say that Devadasis during the British period and then even now are completely in disrepute. And the dance they did is in disrepute. And even now, there are members in my family who wouldn't like me to dance the dance I do, because it's very strong connotations of a lot of different things. All right. So that's why I mentioned the fact that look at the history and look at the place they have in history. They were very much integrated. It was probably the last 300 years where there was a complete paradigm shift in how they were looked at and how we look at what they stand for. So just take the example of their role in healing. That has continued all the way through. Yeah, the role in healing. When we start looking at the growth of science, technology, and medicine, you can almost sort of, see there's an inverse proportion between that and the importance of the Devadasi in a way. Yeah. Again, just another strand I'm throwing out there in terms of if we want to talk about custom and if we want to talk about allies of custom, then we also look at what's actually getting in the way of recognizing custom. That's really key. Finally, right? I think this is my... some of this. And we have currently a lot of water security problems in that part of the country. And even now, all of these lakes are called by that. Yeah. So in conclusion, reinstating customary rights, or filling the gaps to find out what the customary rights are, and then protecting customary rights protects basic human rights, and it helps in the fulfillment of development goals. So this is the most important message I think I'm giving through the paper. But reinstating and protecting customary rights are not easy at all. Why? Because the study of customary rights is very underdeveloped. We just don't know what they are. The study of customary rights is important. We have to find means and ways to study it, methods to study it, again. Yeah? Because I read Tamil, okay, I read Sanskrit, but I don't read Tamil that's 300 years old, right? So that already is a barrier. If I wanted to look at the Devadasi inscriptions in the Chola temple in Tanjavur in 1080. So we need resources, and we will only get that if we recognize that it's actually important to study it. Not for custom's sake, but for the sake of development goals. Yeah. And the next thing I think is really interesting, and probably very interesting in the context of where we are now. I'm talking about a small part of Tamil Nadu sitting in Mexico. Although I think there's lots of similarities. You know, we eat chilies, you eat chilies. I don't find it anywhere else and stuff. So there must have been this kind of thing going on for a long time. But anyway, I think we need, the reason why I mentioned that is because if there are countries and states that are interested in customary practices and laws per se, and I believe in Mexico you're very interested in studying indigenous, you're very interested in studying, that's why we are where we are, then it's important to join forces to see how we can share methods, how we can share ideas, because that kind of sharing seems to have happened all through the centuries. And we should do that now as well. Yeah? So we should be interdisciplinary, we should certainly be collaborative, and we shouldn't be restricted to, you know, geographical boundaries or universities probably. And probably not even to funding. Yeah, if you find someone interesting to talk to, just talk and do it, I think. And finally, on the interdisciplinary part, in the sort of journey where I am now, and what really brought me here, through Wendy of course, is that arts play a very important role in understanding custom. And I suppose many of you might be working already in this area. Oral history gives a lot of records on how land was passed on from one to the other. Song, for example. I've been looking at some of the Devadasi songs, and they actually talk about how this patron came to my house and gave me this piece of land. Because it's there in that song itself. Right? So, in fact, where you don't have you know, laws, or laws have been overridden, which is what, you know, Dutt was talking about, there is a very clear agenda to make sure that the customary laws are not unearthed, to just say, okay, it's always been the Rajwari system, that's our custom. I was, one of my researchers is in India, and he sent me a document after he interviewed a local government official and asked him about, oh, tell me a little bit about what is the law here. And for him, he said in ancient time we had the Rajwari system. So the Indian official is talking to us about 300 years when the British came and put the Rajwari system in place as ancient law. So that is the level of, you know, understanding of the governance stage. So yeah, there is a lot, there's a lot of, if you like, disappearance of that. However, it's not really disappeared. It's just disappeared from the official records and the official narrative. It's available in the arts. And in countries like India, where arts are very much part of life. I mean, I started dancing when I was 3 years old, or upwards of 3 years old. I only started studying law after I was 18, right? So the kind of culture which actually embeds a lot of knowledge in its arts, we should use that, you know. So I think arts play an important role in understanding custom. We just have to find the right method. We also have to find the right amount of time. Yeah, it might take 10 years for me to get to customary law on Mirasi right, but we need to give ourselves that time as well. Okay, I know I've said a lot of things and spoken a lot of things, but I hope parts of it have been relevant to you in some way in your thinking. So with that, I'll finish. Thanks.
Well, we are lucky because we have a few minutes for questions and answers. I have some, but of course I don't want to start myself. So, any comments, questions? Please.
Thank you so much for your talk. I won't comment that this is not my area, so I hope I'm not saying anything wrong, but do customary rights could affect women's position? Because what I find very interesting is that you mentioned the influence of the British presence in the way these different types of right to land are, these days. So my question is that, could it be that some of the characteristics in this type of land rights, I don't know, instead of empowering certain sectors, could, I don't know, affect them?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yes, you're right. The Hindu law before 2005 did not include women as equal co-partners. It actually gave 1/3 less share to women. And in 2005, it was amended to give equal shares to women. So the Hindu law before 2005 was based on customary law, and that's why you got a lesser proportion of share. Okay, so there's obviously change after 2005, and it brought about equality. So I think that's the way to go about when you find that there's change that you want. But anyway, the question is, I might want this change, but then there'll be somebody else who says, hang on, this tribe must be recognized more. So you can imagine what sort of things it will open up. This is where the VGGT is quite good, because it's based on a framework of human rights. So you can, so here is the balancing principle. You've got customary law, and if it is in conflict with these human rights, then the customary law does not trump human rights. Okay? But you have a problem still over there. Do we have a perfect system in human rights? No. Okay? Because at the moment, the human rights that are being really upheld is what we call the civil and political rights. So a right to fair trial and the right to vote is more important than the right to water, which is not recognized as a human right. Okay? So we need wisdom when we deal with this balancing. Yeah? We do need to be very careful about setting the frameworks and the boundaries for which customs we accept, but on which standards we throw out custom as well. Yeah? So that's why it becomes very interesting for us, but it's also very challenging. And it's a very difficult policy issue to deal with. Yeah? And there have been some good cases in the courts in India where some enlightened judges have really taken on this task to balance out custom and, I suppose, modern sensibilities, to put it better for want of a word. But yeah, are there any customs that help women? Do they empower women? I think that is where I was bringing in the Devadasi. That was one of the messages I wanted to give through that as well. Yes, it did empower. It empowered womanhood as opposed to women, I think. Yeah. There are empowering as well as disempowering. I think we should look at it as a whole as well, in terms of how we conceptualize women's rights. Because in India, now we have, I think, a whole spectrum of debate on women's rights. There are your very recognizable feminists. Then there are your recognition of women's rights that say that I have a right to say that I want to be oppressed, sort of thing. If you know what I mean. Yeah. Giving the sort of example of Islam to say, look, I want to actually cover my head. Who are you to say that I shouldn't, and I'm liberated only if I don't cover my head and stuff. So that debate actually gets quite interesting. It's about the conception of women's rights and whether that part of international human rights law is even relevant to that certain parts of the world and certain parts of the culture. Yeah. So yeah, it's a very, very interesting area in itself.
Thanks. More questions, comments?
Thank you very much. I think we are following somehow the same train of thought.
Yeah.
In Mexico, about 10 years ago, 10, 12 years ago, we had a new law saying that indigenous nations and indigenous identities were able to keep their traditions, keep their costumes, regardless what had been imposed by the Spaniards or even by us modern citizens.
Yeah.
And it happened that during the elections, a woman decided to become the representative of her tribe, her nation, and the nation said no, because we have no women here, women are not allowed to vote, of course they are not allowed to be voted, and no man is going to choose you as your representative. So going back to what you're talking about and what she was asking, I find a parallel between the Devadasi story and what is going on right now in Assam, for instance, like all these women, all these widows, all these being accused of witchcraft, for instance. No? You are a witch, so we burn you and we keep your land. And it's pretty much the same thing that happened to the Devdasis. Not like you are prostitutes, you shouldn't be here, get out, and I take your land. So what would happen if we recover these customary laws? Would be there any choice, any chance to reestablish the equality? That
I mean, what was interesting about Devdasi land ownership was that the main instigators of the change were the men of the Devdasi community. They said, I don't have land, you have land. And then they used the whole reform agenda to turn it around to say, can you imagine, there'll be a group of men, and the difference in the Devdasi community men and the difference from the other communities who were like, completely opposite positions. So the motivations for that actually, again, are coming in very insidious ways. But anyway, let me shift the focus from the women, women's side. Tell you what is the good in identifying, in reinstating customary laws. Now, my research provenance is studying commons land. In international law, I studied the moon, the underwater, the seabed, etc., which is all about commons governance. So the reason why I got attracted to studying customary law is because custom places a lot of emphasis on commons governance. So it can bring about a lot of benefit to that. But if I was a women's rights person, I would never take customary law, I suppose. Because most of the examples I'd find are all, not good for women as such. But I also wanted to move away from that trajectory and take Devadasi women because you have an example. Their voices, it's very interesting, all the writings that have come out from Devadasis, especially in the last 100 years. So there's one lady called Nagratamar, people have written about her as a feminist, but there have been other people who have written about her as, is feminism really important in the world? Because from an Indian philosophical point of view, the soul is all, humans are all female. So anything that you have as male or female is actually feminist. And the Devadasi operates within that framework of not just the mortal, but also the immortal or the psychological or the divine or the religious or the spiritual planes. So then what is the relevance of the gender debate within custom in that context is also quite interesting. But I would say yes, studying custom or reinstating custom doesn't seem to immediately benefit women in any way. And the argument I would again say is that custom evolves. So custom during that time was different, and now, if I have a voice, then, and I would probably say, I'm really sad that a dog doesn't have a voice. And then you're going to ask me, am I placing a dog and a woman together? But no, I'm talking about life. So we always have exclusions. And women in that sense were excluded at one point. Women were chattel. Women were slaves. Women were not recognized in any way. So I think we have to, yes, at one level, if you're talking about customary rights and women as such, it can be detrimental. But I do have a belief and also some writing on the fact that looking at custom as a whole to see at what time different people might benefit from it. So the understanding of the international instrument is all mostly on commons lands. And within that, of course, gender is a big element. And because the VGGT is based on a human rights framework, implementing VGGT will make sure that it's in consonance with implementing women's rights as found in international law instruments like CEDAW, the Convention on the Elimination of Discrimination Against Women. So to that extent, we have a framework by which we can question any customary law that might get promoted or reinstated that goes against our current sensibility of women's rights. That's our balancing framework.
Any more questions? Comments? Okay, let me ask a quick one.
All right.
We've been talking about India as a very diverse scenario, so I want to know if there would be any difference from your point of view in the rights to land of Devadasis in Tamil Nadu or South India, in a more general concept, and other regions of India. It has to be studied in a different way, or can we apply one same thing for the whole group of Devadasis?
I think it's similar.
It's similar.
It's quite similar. And they also were ones who moved around.
The itinerant
So they
part.
did, yeah. So they did have, so they moved around, or they had musicians who moved around very much so. There's much more records of that. So in that sense, yes, you can study Tamil Devadasis, and you can take most of that learning and apply it to, let's say, Odisha, where the Jagannath Puri temple had a lot of Devadasis, but they only came a little bit later in time. That would be the difference. I mean, the Tamil Devadasi system is, I think, one of the oldest ones as well.
Okay. Well, now I want to ask if they moved around, how were they attached to the land they own? But maybe that's a different...
Oh, they had an establishment. So they may have moved around for certain purposes, but they left behind people who would discharge their responsibilities to the land or take in the revenue that come from the land. So because they were an establishment. These are, I think you could look at Devadasis as like head of small companies.
Well, now I feel like I want to ask more questions, but I think we can do that during the break. Thank you so much for this talk. We invite you to come back in 15 minutes to the presentation of the book of Dr. Amrita Bahari, and that will be the last activity of this day. So, thank you so much for now, and we'll see you in 15 minutes. Thanks.
mouse? ¿Cuál es? Ah, me va a decir la tableta.
Una vez te entrego la constancia del evento.
Bueno, buenas tardes. Vamos a continuar entonces con el programa. Y tengo la alegría y el honor de ser moderador de la siguiente mesa, en donde se va a hacer la presentación del libro de la doctora Amrita Bahari, intitulado Public-Private Partnership for WTO Dispute Settlement Enabling Developing Countries. Hago una rápida referencia sobre la doctora Bahari. La doctora Bahari es actualmente profesora de Derecho en materia de comercio internacional en el Instituto Tecnológico Autónomo de México, el ITAM. Ella tiene un grado, un doctorado, perdóneme, en comercio internacional por la Universidad de Birmingham y un máster en Derecho por la International Business Law from London School of Economics. Ha publicado muchísimos artículos en revistas especializadas sobre comercio internacional, y sobre los mecanismos de solución de controversias ante la Organización Mundial del Comercio. También contamos con la presencia del doctor Ricardo García de la Rosa, quien junto con el doctor David Bonilla harán la presentación del libro. El doctor García de la Rosa es también profesor, al igual que la autora, profesor del ITAM por la materia de investigación y derecho también de comercio. Él tiene un título de doctorado por la Universidad Jean Moulin de León, Francia. También trabaja en la Suprema Corte de Justicia de la Nación, actualmente como secretario. Y el doctor, por su parte, el doctor Bonilla, tiene estudios en economía. Él actualmente trabaja en el Instituto de Investigaciones Económicas de la UNAM. Tiene su grado de doctor en Inglaterra, en la Universidad de Londres, y en Japón. También tuvo estudios en Japón, en la Universidad de Agricultura y Tecnología de Tokio. Ha trabajado en la PEC y su línea de investigación se especializa en el desarrollo de tecnologías para la energía y el transporte. Bueno, entonces sin más preámbulos, damos primero la palabra a la doctora o al doctor. Por favor. Sí. Sí, creo que está funcionando.
Buenas tardes. Antes que nada, pues quiero agradecer al Programa Universitario de Estudios Asiáticos y ahora que le agregaron África, por la invitación. Y gracias a la doctora Amrita Bahari por invitarme a este evento, y gracias a Wendy, ¿no? Que ayer nos vimos. Pues yo encontré muy interesante el libro. Miren, yo en los 90s trabajé para el APEC en Tokio, representé a México en el aspecto energético y ahí me empecé a involucrar en cuestiones asiáticas. Entonces yo encuentro en esa época que Japón era el superpower, ¿no? Era el poder más importante, y toda esa dinámica está cambiando ahora porque ya no es Japón. Japón está perdiendo representación global y ya es China, y detrás de China viene la India, ¿no? Entonces me atrajo mucho el título. Siento que es muy importante porque la experiencia de la India en dispute settlement, o sea, cómo resolver conflictos de proteccionismo, se me hace como que es medio importante en esta época en la que está la posibilidad de que el TLC, el NAFTA, salga de la ecuación, ¿no? O sea, que lo disuelvan. Ya cada vez la posibilidad es más alta. Yo no lo creía, pero parece ser que la posibilidad ahí está. Y entonces yo creo que es muy importante para todo el mundo prepararse dentro de la OMC y dentro de las reglas del juego que NAFTA estableció para poder defenderse, ¿no? Porque puede venir una oleada de proteccionismo muy seria detrás de la nueva administración que tenemos de Trump. I would like to speak in English, but I'm not sure the audience will be able to follow.
I guess that should be okay.
That's the
because I have
problem,
many
you know.
sessions in English, right?
So, because I think it might be, because I'm not sure you can follow the full, the full story, but my feeling about the book is that it's very timely. I think the case studies that you mentioned are very useful. From an economics perspective, it would have been very, very interesting to look at the actual cases, to look at the actual sectors where there were lots of disputes. I saw some of your graphs with the number of disputes per country, which is very, very useful. But, for someone like me who comes from a economics and business background, we tend to go into details of case studies. So I think that would have made the book even more interesting. I found, very interesting your list of case studies of dispute settlements. For example, the Brazil aircraft, the Canada aircraft conflicts. I found all those things really useful. But I would have loved to read more about those cases, from an economics, from someone like me, who works in economics. But I think, no book is perfect. I think the book has, as far as I remember, 5 chapters. I like the conclusions. I like the way you compare Brazil to India. And I think it's very important for developing countries to develop their own expertise. And you raise this issue in your book. And you mentioned that China is building up expertise very rapidly because they've got the money to do it. And it was interesting to see that, for example, Mexico also has lots of disputes in international scale. And I worry that in Mexico we may not have enough lawyers or economists who understand these issues. And we may have to hire New York consulting groups or New York lawyers to help us out. And that's very expensive for this country. I think UNAM has a perfect opportunity, or ITAM or other universities. They have a perfect opportunity to train experts to defend their national interests. And we all thought that we were living in a free trade. And we believed, especially at ITAM, they believed that, free trade was always going to govern international relations. And at UNAM, we always argued the opposite. We always said, be careful with NAFTA, be careful with depending with only a single partner. You have to do it the way the Brazilians do it, which is to have several business partners, several trading regions which are serving your interests. And I think, coming back to the book, I think you raise this issue of having a pool of lawyers and a pool of economists working together to fight to defend your own patents and copyrights, etc. I think that's a very valid point, and I think the book could serve to develop scenarios of trade. You could say, well, what will happen if the U.S. pulls out of the World Trade Organization, which you mentioned in your book is a perfect example of the rule of law on a global scale. And I like that sentence when you mention the WTO is a good example of it might not be perfect, okay, but it has some merits. And we all know that it's basically the superpowers who set up the World Trade Organization for their own interests. But still, there are some things which are very useful for Mexican trade. So I think I totally agree, but what worries me is what's going to happen next. If the US pulls out of the WTO and you have all this regulatory framework, and behind that you have thousands of hours of lawyers working to design the WTO rules, what happens if the US pulls out of the WTO? If you dissolve NAFTA, you immediately fall into WTO regulatory framework for trading relationships. But if the US pulls out of the WTO, you can have large-scale protectionist measures from other countries, from Germany, from France, from the leading exporting nations. So I think your book is very timely, and I think your book lays the ground for future studies, on scenarios. It could serve the basis to develop scenarios for global conflict within the trading world, So I welcome, this type of research, and so thanks. I think that's all I can add. Yeah, thank you and I know it's a lot of work writing a book, so.
Bueno, muchas gracias, doctor Bonilla.
Sí.
Ahora cedo la palabra al doctor García de la Rosa, quien también hará su comentario.
Gracias. ¿Se escucha? Sí, ¿verdad? Bueno, escucho con mucha atención los comentarios aquí del doctor Bonilla y obviamente, bueno, pues primero que nada, yo este libro, independientemente del contenido que para mí es extremadamente interesante e importante, pues lo leí con mayor entusiasmo y atención, pues porque se trata de una gran amiga mía que la conocí en el 2014, hace 4 años, y bueno, pues el tiempo vuela. Nos conocimos en Sao Paulo. Para mí, Amrita Bahari es una persona, yo la podría definir en una sola palabra: es una persona global. Es una persona global, una persona que, pues este libro que nos acaba de presentar en el ITAM y ahora lo presenta aquí en Filológicas, este libro lo único que refleja precisamente es el espíritu global que tiene Amrita Bahari, y lo percibí desde el primer instante que la conocí. Inmediatamente hicimos clic, por supuesto por los temas de derecho económico internacional, pero inmediatamente yo percibí este espíritu global que tiene Amrita Bahari, y eso lo quiero obviamente resaltar al presentar este trabajo, que ya desde esa época lo estaba pues cocinando, ¿no? Estaba cocinando este libro, que pues el día de hoy lo tengo en mis manos, y la verdad estoy muy orgulloso de ella, muy contento. Y bueno, independientemente de la amistad que tengo con Amrita, yo sí quisiera comentarles a ustedes que tengo en mis manos un libro. Voy a ser optimista y no tan optimista. Tengo en mis manos un libro no especializado, es ultra o hiper especializado, ¿sí? O sea, este libro en realidad es para personas que están en el medio, que están ya sea como funcionarios. Me atrevería a decir en este momento cómo me gustaría que este libro llegara a las manos de las personas que están ahorita negociando el NAFTA 2.0. Si, como dice aquí el doctor Bonilla, si es que vemos el NAFTA 2.0, ¿no? Me encantaría mandárselos inmediatamente este libro, ¿no? Porque es un, pues quizá peque de exagerar, pero es una Biblia. Es una Biblia en el sentido de que como Amrita maneja todo a detalle de y me gustaría hacer una precisión terminológica, porque si nosotros hacemos la traducción literal de Public-Private Partnerships for WTO, aquí en México nos enfrentamos a un primer problema. ¿Y cuál es el primer problema? Que nosotros tenemos un concepto jurídico de lo que son las alianzas público-privadas. Y me gustaría aquí hacer esta precisión terminológica, porque obviamente el libro de Amrita no habla de ese tipo de alianzas público-privadas en el sentido de cómo se crearon hace 30 años en Reino Unido. De hecho, estos mecanismos fueron creados en el gobierno de Margaret Thatcher precisamente para sacar al Reino Unido a flote, ¿no? de este letargo económico que tenía Reino Unido, y no vieron otra manera más que precisamente hacer estas alianzas con el sector privado y el sector público, número uno, para crear infraestructura, ¿sí? Y ese es el espíritu de las alianzas público-privadas, o las private initiatives, que sería la traducción en inglés. Y es importante hacer esta precisión terminológica, porque el libro de Amrita, lo reitero, lo subrayo, es un libro extremadamente, su tema es súper específico, ¿sí? Y peco de decir eso, pero es muy específico. Y obviamente si hacemos esta traducción literal en el ámbito de nuestro derecho mexicano, como lo entendemos en México, pues obviamente Amrita no se está refiriendo a estas alianzas público-privadas o los proyectos para prestación de servicios que conocemos nosotros, e incluso tenemos leyes tanto federales como locales en este ámbito. Nada más para decirles, nosotros tropicalizamos estas figuras jurídicas que se adoptaron en Inglaterra. Básicamente nosotros las adoptamos de los Estados Unidos, y se han creado infraestructuras en el país a través de este tipo de medios. Los segundos puentes del periférico, carreteras, hospitales, escuelas, etcétera, se han creado a través de cárceles, se han creado a través de este tipo de instrumentos. Entonces, mi primer comentario para el libro de Amrita es precisamente esta ayuda terminológica, porque no podemos hacer esta traducción literal, a pesar de que sí voy a decir alianzas público-privadas, ya adentrándonos al tema propiamente del libro de Amrita. Y cuando hablo de alianzas público-privadas, bueno, Amrita obviamente aquí nos hace todo un capítulo de definición de lo que ella entiende y de lo que son las alianzas público-privadas en el ámbito de la Organización Mundial del Comercio. Y la primera idea que me vino a la mente del libro de Amrita es esta cuestión, que no voy a ser tan optimista, ¿no? Yo también escribí al respecto cuando hice precisamente mi tesis doctoral. Y cuando yo hice mi tesis doctoral en los años 2000, pues estaba esta pugna, ¿no? El sistema comercial multilateral, básicamente, cuando surge, bueno, pues surge en 1947, después de la Segunda Guerra Mundial. Los países se sientan y dicen, bueno, pues ya nos repartimos el mundo geográficamente hablando, ahora vamos a organizarnos económicamente hablando, ¿sí? Y entonces los países dicen, en un pueblito ahí muy pintoresco de los Estados Unidos llamado Bretton Woods, se organizan y dicen, bueno, pues vamos a crear instituciones, unas que van a regir el sistema comercial multilateral. Se crea un acuerdo, ni siquiera una institución. Había un antecedente, que era la Organización Internacional del Comercio, pero no tuvo ningún éxito. Y se quedó a nivel de un acuerdo, el famoso GATT, ¿sí?, de 1947, y las otras dos instituciones surgidas del sistema Bretton Woods, ¿no?, el Banco Mundial y el Fondo Monetario Internacional. Entonces, surgen estas instituciones, surge el GATT, que en realidad era un acuerdo, pero un acuerdo como tipo institución, era un híbrido, entre ciertos países, sobre todo países de primer mundo, algunos países en desarrollo, pero en realidad los que siempre llevaron la batuta, pues obviamente fueron los Estados Unidos y Europa, ¿no? Y básicamente los países vencedores de la Segunda Guerra Mundial. Entonces, ahí es donde empezamos precisamente, y esto es, digamos, como el contexto del libro de Amrita, ¿no? La contextualización del libro de Amrita, que creo es importante. Primero, la precisión terminológica, y luego el contexto en el cual Amrita nos presenta este libro. Y entonces empezamos a hablar, ahora sí, del sistema comercial multilateral. Este sistema en el cual se sientan los países, dicen, vamos a comercializar, porque la única manera de que haya paz en el mundo es precisamente a través del comercio, ¿sí? curiosamente, a mí me llama la atención de todos nuestros flamantes candidatos, partidos, los que ustedes quieran, ninguno se ha pronunciado en contra del libre comercio, incluso el puntero, ¿no? El puntero en el último debate presidencial no ha dicho absolutamente nada de que esté en contra del NAFTA, ¿no? Al contrario, todo el mundo está sentado, agarrado de la mesa, a ver en qué momento, porque tenemos un presidente norteamericano bipolar. Nada más vean lo que hizo hoy en la mañana, ¿no? Canceló la cita con Kim Jong-un y ya no va a haber, si estaba propuesto como candidato al premio Nobel, pues ya no, de la paz, pues ya no. Entonces, estamos en un sistema comercial multilateral, en las postrimerías de este sistema, y después vienen estos entronques regionales, ¿sí? A partir de los años 80, finales de los 80, y ya impulsados en los años 90, básicamente con este acuerdo que crea Estados Unidos, primero Canadá y Estados Unidos, y posteriormente pues se une el patito feo llamado México, ¿sí? En 1989 concretamente empieza este acuerdo Estados Unidos, Canadá, y ya posteriormente con las negociaciones del 92 hasta ver el fruto del NAFTA en el 94, ¿sí? El otro regionalismo, pero muy sui generis, que vemos paralelo al sistema comercial multilateral, lo tenemos precisamente con la hoy Unión Europea. En ese momento pues era solamente un acuerdo del carbón y del acero, de la energía atómica, y posteriormente con los acuerdos de Maastricht, de Roma, etcétera, etcétera, pues se crea una Unión Europea que básicamente lo que va a hacer es que los Estados miembros van a renunciar de alguna manera a una parte de su soberanía, crean instituciones supranacionales y al renunciar a esta parte de su soberanía, esta Unión Europea, que curiosamente por ahí decía Henry Kissinger, de alguna manera mofándose de la Unión Europea, decía bueno, European Union, give me the phone number, ¿no? O sea, porque en pocas palabras no se entendía que era la Unión Europea o la Unión Económica Europea. Entonces, ¿por qué les comento esta base para entender el libro de Amrita? Porque durante muchos años, a partir del 47 y hasta los años 90, tuvimos, digamos, como que una pugna entre el sistema comercial multilateral y los regionalismos económicos. De hecho, cuando yo empiezo a investigar desde el máster y después mi tesis doctoral, es precisamente en esta todavía pugna o esta pelea que había entre cómo podía sobrevivir el sistema comercial multilateral con respecto a los regionalismos económicos. Básicamente los más importantes que existían en ese momento pues era la Unión Europea y el Tratado de Libre Comercio de América del Norte, el NAFTA. Y entonces estábamos en esa pugna en el cual pues también ilusos y optimistas del comercio internacional como un servidor y quizá también Amrita, pues creíamos fervientemente que el regionalismo económico iba a ser un elemento propulsor precisamente del sistema comercial multilateral y no un elemento que iba a venir a acabar con el sistema comercial multilateral, ¿sí? Este sistema creado a través del GATT, en ese momento todavía el GATT, posteriormente en el 94 se crea la Organización Mundial del Comercio, y entonces pues que creíamos que era un elemento propulsor, no era un elemento antagónico, ¿sí? El regionalismo. Posteriormente empezaron otro tipo de regionalismos y pasamos de esta pugna de multilateralismo y regionalismo al plurilateralismo. ¿Por qué? Porque hay países como México que empezaron a firmar tratados comerciales con otros países u otras regiones del mundo. Entonces empezamos a ver a México que firma tratados, por ejemplo, de libre comercio con Japón, con la Unión Europea, ¿sí? Con países, pues quizá, obviamente, de Sudamérica, Chile, Colombia, etcétera, etcétera. Y entonces empezamos a ver que ya no es nada más la pugna del sistema comercial multilateral con el regionalismo económico, sino que ya hay un elemento propulsor más, que es el plurilateralismo. Y en ese momento se estaba hablando de la idea de crear un NAFTA a la escala continental. Esto es el acuerdo, el llamado Acuerdo de Libre Comercio de las Américas, ¿sí? Acuerdo de Libre Comercio de las Américas que revienta, pues, estos gobiernos de izquierda de los años 2000, entre ellos el gobierno de Lula, Evo Morales en Bolivia, Brasil, Lula, perdón, pero se me está yendo, los Kirchner, obviamente, en Argentina, y el paladín de Chávez, ¿no? El de Chávez en Venezuela. Entonces, ¿qué sucede con esto? Que el epicentro del comercio internacional durante la época del multilateralismo había sido Europa con el Atlántico en Estados Unidos. Después este epicentro del comercio internacional se va moviendo hacia América con el NAFTA, y finalmente, cuando termina la idea del Acuerdo de Libre Comercio de las Américas, este epicentro se va ahora a Asia, ¿sí? A Asia. Y entonces aquí, ¿en qué etapa nos encontramos en el libro de Amrita? Que es pertinente en todas las etapas que les estoy comentando. Pues en ninguna de las tres, sino que precisamente en qué momento comercial nos encontramos hoy en día, pues en un momento comercial en el cual los regionalismos económicos se están terminando, ¿sí? No sabemos a ciencia cierta al día de hoy qué va a pasar con el Tratado de Libre Comercio de América del Norte. Los países están, digamos, como que tirando pedradas o tiros para sobrevivir, ¿sí? Y entonces México volteó inmediatamente otra vez con Europa y decir, bueno, pues vamos a retomar, vamos a renovar, vamos a crear nuestro Tratado de Libre Comercio 2.0, y inmediatamente fue lo que hizo el gobierno mexicano, ¿no? Y ahora tenemos al paladín del sistema comercial multilateral, que una de las políticas del Fondo Monetario Internacional eran sabidas, y esto lo explica muy bien Amrita cuando trata el tema de la India, porque la India, yo cuando leí el capítulo de la India, es la historia de México. Hay una crisis económica muy fuerte en la India en los años 90, acuden al Fondo Monetario Internacional, y lo primero que les pide el Fondo Monetario Internacional, como en su momento nos pidieron a nosotros con el consenso de Washington fue: abran su economía a México. Y eso fue lo que implementó India, y lo comenta de forma magistral Amrita en su libro. Y eso es lo que pasó con nosotros en los años 90, desde los años 80, porque hay que decirlo, México se abre al comercio internacional no en los años 90 con el NAFTA, México, el gran ideólogo de la apertura, el gran neoliberal, presidente mexicano en México fue Miguel de la Madrid, no fue Carlos Salinas de Gortari. Hay que precisar que México entra al GATT en 1986, y todas las reformas necesarias para que México pudiera entrar al GATT en 1986 vinieron de la presidencia de Miguel de la Madrid, no de Carlos Salinas de Gortari. Carlos Salinas de Gortari encontró las condiciones ya muy bien puestas, la mesa muy bien puesta, obviamente, para poder voltear a Estados Unidos, y cuando vio que ahora sí que como hay el fenómeno del free rider, ¿no? Vio que estaba negociando Canadá con Estados Unidos y dijo, oigan, pues estamos geográficamente en la misma zona, ¿por qué no le entra a México? Y aparte, hay que decirlo, México siempre ha negociado con Estados Unidos, siempre ha intercambiado personas, comercio, armas, todo lo que quieran, siempre lo ha intercambiado México con Estados Unidos. Lo que pasa es que antes era de facto, y después se hizo de jure, ¿sí? Esto es con un tratado de libre comercio, pero México siempre ha negociado con Estados Unidos, entonces era una aproximación natural, Todo esto se los digo porque el momento comercial que estamos viviendo es precisamente un momento de completa incertidumbre, con un presidente norteamericano que lo primero que hace es decir, en lugar de que, como impulsaba siempre Estados Unidos, abran sus economías, yo quiero entrar a su economía, ahora tenemos un presidente que dice, no, America first, y lo primero que voy a hacer es, bueno, con México, I'm going to build a wall, y con el resto del mundo voy a cerrarme. O sea, estamos verdaderamente en una contradicción, en una antítesis de lo que Estados Unidos estuvo pregonando desde 1947. Y este es el momento económico en el cual Amrita nos presenta este libro. Algunos podrán decir y criticar a Amrita y decirle, este libro, pues en realidad podríamos ya guardarlo en el cajón de los recuerdos, porque el sistema comercial multilateral, con un presidente norteamericano como el que conocemos y con la bipolaridad que tiene mental, pues podríamos decir, pues lo guardamos y hasta en un mejor momento, quizás hasta dentro de 6 años, porque pues algunas voces dicen que quizá gane la reelección Trump. Pero yo no lo veo así, yo siento que este esquema que nos explica Amrita en su libro, precisamente de alianzas público-privadas, ahora sí, en el tema del libro de Amrita, es de una vigencia, no me atrevería, o sea, no podría hablar de vigencia. Por eso decía que es como una Biblia y deberían de estar en las bibliotecas de la Secretaría de Economía, en la biblioteca de cualquier despacho que se dedica a comercio internacional, de las bibliotecas universitarias de la UNAM, obviamente, y yo pienso que este libro es fundamental porque nos explica, ¿qué nos explica Amrita? Nos explica algo que o presumimos o no entendemos cada vez que hablamos de comercio internacional. Y entonces, ¿cómo entender el comercio internacional desde el empresario, desde el exportador? ¿Cómo le hace para que su producto, digamos, una persona, una comunidad indígena que haga blusitas muy bonitas? Yo he visto muchas de las blusas mayas, me encantó, las vi en Francia, la última vez que fui, y muchas mujeres vestidas, lo ven las francesas muy chic, vestidas con sus chanclitas y con la ropa de las mujeres mayas. ¿Cómo le hace esa comunidad maya para que lleguen sus camisas a venderse en París? Nunca nos lo preguntamos, ¿no? Pensamos que todo es automático, que a lo mejor ellas lo mandan por correo postal, tienen una compañía allá o abren una tienda, y no entendemos todo lo que hay de fondo en el comercio internacional, y esto es lo que Amrita nos explica de manera, obviamente muy técnica, pero de una manera también muy amigable. O sea, los papers que he leído en la materia de comercio internacional son muy tediosos, muy rebuscados. Amrita tiene un lenguaje muy simple, muy fácil de leer, ¿sí? Y precisamente nos explica las relaciones tanto jurídicas como fácticas, esto es, las relaciones jurídicamente implementadas de la iniciativa privada me refiero desde el productor de bienes o servicios, pasando por las asociaciones de productores, las cámaras, las confederaciones de productores de una línea de productos, de una línea de producción, de algún producto en particular, hasta precisamente llegar al gobierno federal, y el gobierno federal cómo va a hablar con esos productores y cómo van a entender que ciertas tarifas en el extranjero les benefician o les perjudican, ¿sí? Porque acuérdense, hay dos grandes, principios en el comercio internacional, y son principios de la Organización Mundial del Comercio. Lo que es el principio de la reciprocidad, que se bifurca en dos grandes principios, que es el trato nacional y la nación más favorecida. Y esto es un principio, digamos, yo lo entiendo básico, como de niños chiquitos. ¿Qué quiere decir esto? Cuando uno estaba en el kinder y le decía a su amiguito, oye, yo traigo un sándwich, ¿tú qué traes? Ah, pues yo traigo una botella de agua. Si yo te doy parte de mi sándwich, ¿sí? ¿Tú qué me vas a dar a cambio? Y entonces el comercio internacional, de una forma tan básica, es como está reflejada en estos principios, ¿no? El principio de reciprocidad, el principio de la nación más favorecida y el principio de trato nacional. Porque una vez que entra un producto, el producto que la comunidad indígena, las blusitas mayas, llegan a París, quizás la comunidad bretona en la ciudad de Morlaix también tienen sus túnicas, Y entonces van a querer el mismo trato preferencial recíproco que tienen los bretones y que tienen los mayas. Entonces, ¿cómo se hace todo ese mecanismo? A través de lo que nos explica el libro de Amrita. A través precisamente de estas asociaciones público-privadas para llegar precisamente a que esas blusas de Yucatán lleguen precisamente a París. Y eso es, digamos, se cuenta la historia cuando todo marcha de maravilla. Pero sabemos que no todo marcha de maravilla. ¿Y qué nos explica Amrita en su libro cuando las cosas no marchan de maravilla? Cuando hay precisamente pleitos, ¿sí? Y estos pleitos, pues Amrita nos los explica perfectamente bien quiénes son los actores que van a entrar dentro de este tipo de procesos que se van a, en su caso, en la Organización Mundial del Comercio, se van a dirimir en un órgano que se llama el órgano de solución de diferendos o de controversias en la Organización Mundial del Comercio, y también en el órgano de apelación, porque hay un órgano de apelación. Ahorita el profesor Bonilla nos estaba hablando de esta falta de funcionarios y de abogados especializados en la materia que tenemos en México. Sí, los tenemos, pero también tenemos funcionarios altamente especializados mexicanos. Por ejemplo, fíjense, está Ricardo Ramírez Hernández. Ricardo Ramírez Hernández era un abogado de un despacho aquí norteamericano, Chadbourne and Park, y ahora es uno de los jueces del órgano de apelación, fue presidente del órgano de apelación en la Organización Mundial del Comercio, pero desgraciadamente este tipo de funcionarios, este tipo de abogados son garbancios de libra en nuestro país. Sí. Son muy pocos, los contamos con los dedos de la mano. Y creo que el libro de Amrita precisamente es una invitación aparte a que, ya lo estamos haciendo nosotros en el ITAM. La UNAM no se puede quedar atrás precisamente para que se impulsen cursos. Cuando conocí a Amrita fue precisamente en el marco de cuáles eran los retos de la enseñanza del comercio internacional económico para no nada más las universidades, sino para los países. Y entonces estuvimos reunidos gente de la India, de México, de Brasil, de Alemania, de todos los países del mundo, precisamente discutiendo estos temas. Y los temas eran de cómo vamos a enseñarle nosotros a los estudiantes un tema tan hiper especializado y sobre todo a un tema que es súper necesario, porque todos los días para que esta es marca mexicana, quiero creer, pero imagínense que tuviera una botella de Viana aquí. ¿Cómo podemos hacerle para que esté la botella de Viana aquí y me ayude a refrescar la garganta? ¿Sí? Y todo esto es lo que explica Amrita en su libro, cuando las cosas van mal. Cuando las cosas van mal. Ya no me quiero extender mucho porque tiene que hablar la autora del libro. Solamente me gustaría comentarles dos partes del libro que me encantaron, que ya es el corolario de su libro. Y son las provisiones de transparencia que tienen estas alianzas público-privadas. Ella nos menciona 5 casos. Y antes de que termine, también quiero resaltar algo importantísimo de su libro. La metodología. La metodología de Amrita es una metodología del libro, es una metodología dialéctica. ¿Qué quiero decir con esto? Que es pregunta y respuesta. Amrita, lo más increíble de su libro es que lo que ella hizo fue, se lanzó al ruedo, hizo investigación de campo y fue con los funcionarios brasileños, con los funcionarios de la India, con los funcionarios de la Unión Europea, de Estados Unidos, y les preguntó de viva voz, a ver, ¿usted cómo ve estas cuestiones? ¿Cómo las resuelve el gobierno? ¿Cuál es la actitud que tienen los funcionarios públicos que ven el comercio internacional respecto del sistema de solución de controversias en la Organización Mundial del Comercio, etcétera, etcétera? Esto es muy importante resaltarlo, porque Amrita no hizo un análisis hipotético de laboratorio en su escritorio. No. Ella se fue al campo y le preguntó a las personas, a los funcionarios que están precisamente resolviendo estos asuntos, y de ahí sacó sus conclusiones y están en el libro. ¿Sí? Entonces, eso es importante y se me está escapando subrayar del libro de Amrita. Y lo último, para no extenderme, es que una vez que ya están estas alianzas público-privadas y cómo están funcionando los productores con las cámaras de las diferentes industrias de la producción, de servicios, etcétera, cómo funciona el gobierno con respecto a esta relación de cámaras y productores y cómo van a idear una estrategia para defender estos intereses, pues son la necesidad, y es una de las conclusiones a las cuales llega ella, la necesidad de transparencia, ¿sí? ¿Cuánta transparencia se necesita en este tipo de negociaciones? Escuchamos que están negociando el NAFTA, pero no sabemos qué están negociando a ciencia cierta, no sabemos qué están diciendo. Y algo tan importante, esto en Europa estaría sujeto a un referéndum, y algo tan importante como saber qué están negociando la Secretaría de Economía con Ildefonso Guajardo y sus pares en Canadá y en Estados Unidos, lo deberíamos de ver incluso en la televisión o en algún medio, las negociaciones, y no hay transparencia. Y esto Amrita lo subraya, esto hay necesidad de transparencia. Y otro punto también muy importante, y no quería dejarlo escapar porque pues obviamente me es muy afín con las actividades que realizo hoy en la Corte, es precisamente la necesidad o la posibilidad que algunos países se reservan para que las decisiones que toma el cuerpo o los grupos de solución de diferencias en la OMC o el grupo de apelación sean revisadas por los poderes judiciales locales, lo que le llaman ahorita el Judicial Review. Aquí nos da dos ejemplos muy interesantes, el de la Unión Europea y el de China. Por ejemplo, China, cualquier disposición que se decida en la Organización Mundial de Comercio pasa revisión en sus tribunales. La Unión Europea, digamos que lo hace de una manera un poco hipócrita, ¿no? Dice, no, vamos por el libre comercio, la economía está abierta, pero siempre deja la posibilidad de que la Corte Europea la Corte Europea pueda revisar algunas de las decisiones que se toman, por ejemplo, en la OMS. ¿Qué sucede con nuestro país? Es ahí donde voy, y precisamente ahí termino mi intervención. Voy a hablar no de la OMC, sino del NAFTA. El NAFTA, el capítulo 19, el artículo 1904, fue una de las negociaciones más complicadas, tanto para Estados Unidos, Canadá y México, y fue precisamente la renuncia que hicieron los tres países para que cualquier sistema jurisdiccional del país doméstico revisara las decisiones del cuerpo arbitral o del panel binacional que decidiera algún pleito o arbitraje entre los países contratantes. Les hablo exclusivamente del caso de México porque en 1994 tenía lógica como estaba la anterior ley de amparo. Quizá estoy hablándoles algo de una cuestión muy técnica. ¿Qué sucede, por ejemplo, si, pónganse ustedes a pensar, tenemos al productor Bachoco, que es productor de huevo y de productos de pollo, avícolas. Y entonces entra, por ejemplo, la productora de Pilgrim's Prime de Estados Unidos, de Kentucky, y entonces empieza a invadir de pollo a México, y entonces llega Bachoco y dice, oye, Secretaría de Economía, tienes a Pilgrim's Prime que está metiendo pollo, y fíjense cómo venden los gringos el pollo, es bien curioso. También el comercio internacional, y Amrita lo refleja en su libro, el comercio internacional también es idiosincrasia, también es cultura. ¿Por qué? Este tema del pollo no es un caso hipotético, es un caso que está en la Secretaría de Economía de dumping. Y fíjense ustedes que es curioso porque en la Secretaría de Economía el tema del pollo en el país, nosotros los mexicanos consumimos el pollo por piezas, los norteamericanos no. Los norteamericanos, si tú no le vendes el pollo entero, jamás vas a ver a un norteamericano comprar una piernita, una alica o un pescuecito. Y en México vas a ver a la señora, a la abuelita, y va al mercado, y lo único que le va a decir al pollero es que le venda una piernita con un muslito. ¿Por qué? Porque nuestra cultura está precisamente comprar el pollo de esa forma. Los gringos no lo compran así. ¿Por qué les comento esto? Porque está el pleito de que llega Pilgrim's Prime, introduce pollo a México por partes, a destajo, a precios inferiores de lo que lo está vendiendo el mercado nacional, concretamente Bachoco. Bachoco entonces le toca la puerta a la Secretaría de Economía y le dice, oye, pues aplícale cuotas compensatorias. ¿Por qué? Porque está vendiendo el pollo más barato de lo que yo lo vendo en el mercado. Y entonces, ¿por qué les establezco esto? Porque esto es un tema que llegó a un panel binacional del NAFTA y resolvió el NAFTA, y entonces, ante esa resolución, no hay posibilidad de que Bachoco pueda promover un juicio de amparo, porque hay una renuncia expresa en el artículo 1904 del NAFTA, en el cual no pueden acudir a la revisión jurisdiccional los Estados miembros respecto de las decisiones que se tomen en estos paneles binacionales. Y entonces, ¿por qué? Mi última reflexión, y esto es lo que me invitó el libro de Amrita a pensar. En 1994 tenía lógica y quizás tenía cierto sustento. Pero ahora va a ser interesante, si llegamos a ver a la luz del día el Tratado de Libre Comercio 2.0, va a ser muy interesante y será un tema de, yo creo que Amrita lo va a tratar en la siguiente edición de este libro, porque va a hablar de México, esa es una crítica que le hago, habla de Brasil, de la Unión Europea, de Estados Unidos, pero no habla de México, y ya va a tener mucho material de qué hablar de México. Es precisamente que hoy en día este tipo de renuncias tendrían muchísimos candados con la reforma del 2011 que hubo en materia de derechos humanos en México. Número uno, en la reforma de derechos humanos en México en el 2011. Dos, con el control de regularidad constitucional que tenemos hoy en día con la famosa contradicción de tesis 293 diagonal 2011, en el cual se establecen los tratados internacionales al mismo nivel de la Constitución, pero tratados internacionales que tengan contenido o que sean de materia de derechos humanos. Y tres, también no tendría mucho sustento esta renuncia con la nueva ley de amparo. Entonces, a lo que voy es que este tema que dice Amrita y que concluye la importancia que tiene la revisión jurisdiccional de los estados en sus tribunales de origen, de las decisiones que se tomen en este tipo de paneles o de este tipo de sistemas de resolución de diferendos OMC multilateral o regional de NAFTA. En el caso de México, hoy en día, como está la nueva interpretación de derechos humanos, como está la nueva ley de amparo y como está precisamente la nueva interpretación de los tratados internacionales y que están al nivel de la Constitución, híjoles, me gustaría ver qué productos sacan, si es que sacan un nuevo producto, los negociadores del Tratado de Libre Comercio. Con eso termino. Muchas gracias.
Muchas gracias. Agradecemos al doctor García de la Rosa. Y ahora vamos a cederle la palabra a la autora Bahari, para que nos dé sus comentarios e impresiones de su libro y su influencia en nuestro país.
Muchas gracias, Jorge.
You can speak freely in English if you want to.
Okay. Thanks to all the audience. Thanks to UNAM, the organizers, Wendy and Jorge, for inviting me, having me here, and giving me this wonderful platform to present my book, speak about my thoughts. Is it okay now? Could you? Hello? No, so I guess it's not working. Okay, great. I think it's fine now, right? Great. Okay. So once again, thanks a lot to the organizers, Wendy and Jorge, for having me here and for giving me this wonderful platform to speak about my book. It is indeed for the very first time I've come to UNAM to an academic conference. I remember for the very first time I was invited to UNAM by my friend, Ricardo. he was delivering a course on WTO law here, and he asked me to come and fill in some classes for him. So I did that gladly, and this is indeed the second time, but very first time in an academic conference like this. So thank you. Thanks a lot for your efforts. David, I would first want to respond to the commentaries of the two distinguished commentators, and then I would try and conclude very briefly with some comments that I have on the book. David, thank you for your very, indeed valuable, precious comments. In terms of the economic perspective you were talking about, you did mention a point that it would have benefited the book to talk and comment perhaps more about the nature of the cases from law and economics point of view, and the nature of the subject matter that was being litigated at that time at the World Trade Organization. I think that is a wonderful suggestion, and I would have loved to take that on board. However, my constraint in this book was the purpose. The purpose of the book was capacity building. So we are talking about a rich person and a poor person being able to go to the court. And of course, a rich person has the same rights and same obligations in a country as a poor person. But of course, the problem comes when we think about access to justice. Who has a bigger access to justice? That person would be able to enforce its own remedies. Both have the same remedies in law in all the countries, for example, in Mexico or in India. However, the one who has the means and the capacity and the resources to enforce the remedies would be able to go to the court and access the real justice. Likewise, we have tried to compare the capacity, compare the expertise that developing and the developed country members of the World Trade Organization have today. World Trade Organization is fairly a universal organization with more than 166 members today. And it has a huge chunk of countries which are still developing, including Mexico and India and Brazil and China, right? The purpose was to basically compare the capacity constraints of these countries and try and come up with some kind of model, some kind of strategy for developing countries that they can employ and perform better at the World Trade Organization's court with less resources, cost effectively. So that was the purpose, and that's why I did not really focus on the case analysis. However, I think it's a fantastic idea to try and approach a couple of cases with law and economics approach. Maybe we can talk about that later. I have tried to do that in one of my articles. I would love to send it to you. Your comment on the dispute settlement and legal capacity available in Mexico, I think really interests me quite a lot, and that is indeed going to be my next paper. I've started researching it with a very empirical approach. So what I'm doing is I'm going to the stakeholders, the officials at Secretariat of the Economy and the trade lawyers and the companies in Mexico who have been involved in the past 10 years at various WTO dispute settlement matters, and I'm interviewing them to try and analyze the dispute settlement journey of Mexico so far, right? And you'll be pleased to know that Mexico has enormously developed a huge powerhouse of dispute settlement capacity in the last 20 years. If you compare pre and post situation of Mexico, you would see that Mexico today has a lot more number of trade lawyers who are experts, who are trained in WTO laws, and they have the full capacity to go to the WTO and contest a case, even in front of the US, even in front of the EU. So we do have in Mexico some really well-trained lawyers. My friend Ricardo gave an example of Ricardo Ramirez, who has recently retired as the appellate body member of the World Trade Organization. However, there are many, endless number of examples that come to my mind when I talk about the legal expertise and the legal knowledge that Mexico possesses at the moment. I think building up of the expertise in a country starts at the very grassroots level. So when I talk about grassroots level, I refer to the universities and the courses on WTO law and dispute settlement that universities impart to their students. There are courses at UNAM, there are courses at ETAM, and pretty much there are courses at undergraduate and postgraduate level on WTO and dispute settlement at most of the universities in Mexico. I think that is a fantastic development. However, the problem today is that these courses are optional. I mean, I'm not sure what the status is at UNAM. However, at ETAM, the course on World Trade Organization and dispute settlement is an optional course. So I think if we really are serious about building our capacity and know-how and knowledge, we need to start from the very grassroots level. We need to prepare and equip our students today at the law schools. What happens if WTO pulls out of WTO? What happens if the US pulls out of WTO? Well, your first question was, what happens if the US pulls out of NAFTA? We go back to WTO. What happens if the US pulls out of WTO? Well, we do have a problem. However, there is a backup plan that the Pacific Rim countries have come together and tried to devise. And the backup plan is the TPP, the Trans-Pacific Partnership Agreement. 12 countries, well now 11 after the US withdrew from the agreement of Trans-Pacific Partnership, is not a perfect, but at least an imperfect alternative to the multilateral trading system which is facing a threat today. Of course, I'm not too optimistic. Of course, I have concerns. But the model and the mechanisms and the provisions used in the Trans-Pacific Partnership Agreement, to which Mexico is a party to, and other Pacific Rim countries are a party to, presents a wonderful interim alternative to fill up the gap, if at all, WTO comes under a problem. Ricardo, my friend, well, he's already described to you our friendship, so I needn't say anything more on that. Of course, he's the, what do I say, the reason or the culprit of me being here in Mexico, because I was working in the UK and we met at a conference in Brazil, and he invited me over to Mexico to present a paper. That's it, like for 1 hour, and I say bye to Mexico and go back home. But I came here and I fell in love with it for the obvious reasons you would all know about. And now I'm casi chilango. So thanks, my friend, for having me here. I really appreciate this. You've shown me a different world, which I really appreciate. I'll try and address some questions, some issues that you raised in the session, in your talk today. First of all, why not Mexico? So why don't I talk about Mexico in my book? My love for Mexico is newfound. So the book was written before I fell in love with it. In the past 1 year, I have been here in Mexico working at ETAM University. I have finished working on 1 article and 2 book chapters focused on Mexico's dispute settlement and trade defense mechanisms. I have recently sent a paper to Oxford University Press on how Mexico treats non-market economies like China in anti-dumping proceedings, in trade defense mechanisms. And Mexico has a very interesting approach that the world should know about. Because so far, when you hear about Mexico and US trade relations, the US media kind of hijacks the news, right? It is difficult for the world it is difficult for Mexico to get across our perspective on trade, on NAFTA, on WTO, on trade defense, on China, on non-market economies. However, with the help of the research infrastructure in Mexico, academics have been doing quite a lot of research, and this is the beginning of my journey, and I hope the journey would be nice, beautiful, long, and fruitful. Ricardo, you also raised a concern as to whether this book would be able to reach in the hands of right people. I guess this is a very pertinent point. I think the success of this book lies in going to the policymakers. The policymakers in developing countries. I have already started, kind of initiated the effort. We launched the book at ETAM University a couple of weeks ago, and we invited people from Secretaría de Economía, the Ministry of Economy in Mexico, to come and launch the book and speak about it. And by that, we kind of tried to make sure that they read the book and they get aware of the trends that other emerging economies and developing country users of the WTO are employing. So that was a small beginning. However, I think we really need to work on that. We really need to work on that. The word, your age-old problem with the typology of public-private partnership. I still remember, I think that was in 2014, you invited me to Mexico. So I was presenting a staff seminar at ETAM, and my friend asks me a question, and his only question was, what do you mean by public-private partnership? I don't like this typology. I don't like this terminology. And you sound quite similar to Ankit. He's my husband. Because you challenged the title of the book, and he challenged the research question of the book. So when the book was all ready and I was going to send it for publication, I sent it to my husband, and I was like, would you want to read it, please, at least the introduction, just to give me your feedback? And he's like, yeah, I think it's okay, but there's some problem with the research question. I don't like your research question. And you sound very similar to Ankit when you say that you don't like the terminology of public-private partnership. And I completely agree with you, Ricardo. The book comes at the right time. It comes at the right time because you are looking today at an era where the whole multilateral trading system, where the world trade system is at crossroads, really. It is right at the brink of an edge. It has a threat of falling down from that edge, right? There has been many developments recently, and mostly, I would say the reason for this crossroads is the open war US is trying to wage on free trade, on multilateral trade. And there are various examples to look at. The US has banned, in a way blocked, the appointment of appellate body members for the past 1.5 years now. So basically, World Trade Organization has this international court, which is known as dispute settlement mechanism. And this dispute settlement mechanism also has an appellate authority. So if one of the member countries is not happy with the decision, with the ruling of the dispute settlement mechanism, they can file an appeal at the appellate body mechanism. And the appellate body committee is composed of 7 members. There are 7 members at a given period of time at the appellate body, and each member has a tenure of 4 years. And after the 4 years, the member countries, all the member countries, 166 member countries of the World Trade Organization, have the option of either renewing the term of the sitting appellate body members or appointing a new appellate body member. And all the member countries, 166 member countries of World Trade Organization, have a veto for the reappointment or for the new appointment of an appellate body member. What has US been doing? I think typical of US, because it has this habit of creating and destroying its own baby. Back then in 1990s, 1980s, the efforts to create World Trade Organization were started by the US. I mean, we can track it back all the way to 1940s. So the US was the biggest advocate and the leader behind the establishment, behind the creation of the World Trade Organization and the dispute settlement mechanism that we have today. And for the past 1.5 years, what is it doing? It is trying to block the new appointment as well as the reappointment of the appellate body members. What does that leave us with? So we had 7 members to begin with. It has already blocked the reappointment or new appointment of 3. We are left with 4 members now. For each case to be heard at the stage of an appellate review, you need a minimum of 3 appellate body members to sign the decision. By 2019, we would be left with less than 3 if this trend carries on. What does that mean? that means that we are looking and we are moving towards an era where the entire dispute settlement body would be paralyzed. And the effect of paralysis would percolate down to the multilateral trading system, at the very spirit of multilateral trading system, because the World Trade Organization has been criticized for many reasons, right? Whenever we hear this word of WTO, it's always for the bad reasons. It's always a criticism or a threat that is affecting the system. And it has been criticized for not treating developing countries and least developed countries wisely. It has been criticized for promoting unfair trade, and the list goes on and on. However, the only element or the only feature of the World Trade Organization system that has been appreciated by all member countries so far, with few exceptions, is the dispute settlement mechanism. Is this international court, is this multilateral court that has the power of delivering binding resolutions on the sovereign countries, on the sovereign members of the World Trade Organization. We are looking at dispute settlement mechanism, which is the most active, the most successful, and trust me or not, the fastest multilateral adjudicatory mechanism with an appellate authority, with the binding jurisdiction in the world we have got today. There is nothing else in parallel to the World Trade Organization dispute settlement mechanism. So it has many benefits. It is a big success story we are looking at. However, it is facing a huge threat. When these developments started to take place, I was really scared. I was like, oh my God, I need to finish my book ASAP. Who's going to read it if there's no WTO dispute settlement organization in the future? So it's like writing my publisher, do it ASAP. We need to get it onto the market. We have no idea whether there's going to be a World Trade Organization court in the future or not. It is worrying at the same time. Because the dispute settlement mechanism has given a platform to developed as well as to developing countries to protect and enhance their foreign market access. So Mexico today has a remedy. Mexico today has a right if the US is trying to violate the principles of WTO law as long as it remains a member of the World Trade Organization. Mexico has a remedy to go to the World Trade Organization's court and tell US that, hey, what you're doing is completely wrong and we can cross-retaliate against you. However, there are problems. There are capacity gaps. As Ricardo mentioned, WTO dispute settlement mechanism, to use this multilateral court, is a very costly affair. The countries require a lot of resources, a lot of finances to perhaps hire these high-profile trade lawyers from DC, Brussels, to collect evidential resources, to get together expert lawyers and economists to analyze cases, because WTO cases are very law and economic in nature. A lawyer cannot understand the subject matter of World Trade Organization's case or litigation in isolation with economic perspectives. So it requires multitasking, it requires multidisciplinary analysis. So to get together all these kind of expertise and evidential resources could be unaffordable for most developing countries. And there has been, as a result, developing countries, for example, Mexico, India. I personally know cases where Mexico and India both had a perfectly winning case. They knew that the other party is violating the principles of WTO law. We have a perfectly winning case at hand. If we take it to the WTO, we will win the case. But they did not go ahead. They did not file the litigation. Why? Clearly short of capacity. There were capacity constraints that stopped them to go ahead and invoke the provisions of the dispute settlement mechanisms. However, on a positive note, countries, emerging economies like Mexico and India, present an example that negates everything whatever I've said today or so far. It negates it. Why? Because these developing countries, I would now just focus on India. These developing countries, or for example India, has massively enhanced its dispute settlement capacity in the last 10 years. You can look at a very recent example. This week, 2 days ago, not even 2 days, 1.5 days ago, India has filed a case at the World Trade Organization against the US. For what? For the obvious measure of the US, where the US has imposed very steep tariffs on the import of aluminium and steel from all the countries. Not just against India, but from all the countries. Yeah, well, Mexico and Canada are exceptions because they're covered under NAFTA.
Yeah, but only for a while.
Only for a while, right, until we get to the renegotiation, and Argentina under the bilateral trade agreements. But most of the countries are now victim of these tariffs from the US. India is the first country to take the US to the court, to the World Trade Organization's court.
Because they've got the expertise.
Because of the giant steel industry India has, right? Right. Absolutely. Absolutely. So, what do we see here? We see a developing country. Of course, it doesn't have that kind of resources that the US or the EU would have, taking a superpower to the World Trade Organization's court at an era where the WTO judges sitting at the panel and the appellate body are not even sure of their existence because of the US. US has sabotaged, US has made hostage the very judges of the World Trade Organization. And India is bringing the US to the court in this era, in this scenario, in this situation. What is behind this courage? What is behind this massive capacity building in India is a story to be told. India's dispute settlement journey is a story. And in one of the chapters of my book, I have tried to tell that story. I have strong beliefs that India's dispute settlement journey prepares a blueprint. It prepares a roadmap for other developing country members and least developed country members of the World Trade Organization to prepare and strengthen their performance and participation at the World Trade Organization's dispute settlement mechanism. And I completely agree with my friends here that the book comes at an opportune time where we need to raise the voice that reaffirms, the voice that reinforces the developing countries' faith in the multilateral trading system. Thank you.
Just to figure it out, the force of India, I would like to read you 4 lines of the book of Amrita. Just 4 lines. Look. When she says, since January 1995 to January 2017, India has acted as a complainant in 23 cases, as a respondent in 24 cases, and as a third party in 126 cases. And listen to this. This number shows that India is in different capacities has participated in 173 cases out of 520 cases filled out of the WTO DSU during the same period. Hence, in one way or the other, India has participated in over 33% of the cases filled of the WTO. 33% of los casos.
But Mexico is not way behind. Mexico has participated in over 25% of the cases as a complainant or a respondent or a third-party participant.
Yeah, I really like the comments of Dr. Garcia de la Rosa. I liked your the discussion of the book and the background that you gave, the history of world trade. And what I wanted to say was to come back to the idea of scenarios, which is an area where I have done some work on global transport. And I think if you apply the principle of scenarios, it's very difficult to do law in the future. That's a sector that we've always found very difficult to predict what might happen. So, you know, you can do it in finance, you can do it in transportation, you can do it in oil markets, but when it comes to law, it's very difficult to make law, to imagine the law into the future. And I think that there are some seeds in the book which could help us to build this into business style futures or scenarios, you know. So I think it's important to talk to people who are doing scenarios.
What do you mean by a scenario?
Well, the scenarios is to imagine the future, in this case of world trade. And it's different to forecasting, because forecasting is more mechanistic. And if you think of qualitative scenarios, we always come up with the question of what if. So when I first mentioned in my introduction the collapse, imagine the collapse of the World Trade Organization under Trump, it was just a what if. I find it extremely difficult for the United States to pull out of the World Trade Organization, basically because there are financial ties to Asia. Let me just give you one example of one story I read in New York Times in February. The first month after Trump had come to power, there was a note that Jared Kushner, Trump and others had a meeting, and Trump came out saying, we don't want NAFTA. We want to pull out of NAFTA as soon as possible. Apparently Wall Street, the banking community, in half an hour had persuaded him not to pull out of NAFTA. The peso was trading at 30 pesos per dollar. I mean the dollar, sorry. The dollar was trading at, 30 pesos. And it was a nightmare for financial markets. In other words, any small movement in international architecture, in the international legal architecture that has held together relative peace among the major superpowers, it has been trade, as you mentioned. And this is a very important pillar of world stability. Now, if you add the financials here, if you add the financial markets, it's not that easy to pull out of NAFTA, let alone the WTO. And I'm telling you, the Germans, the Japanese, the Chinese are ready to roll. The moment you impose a tariff, there will be a counterattack from them. The US has just announced a 25% tariff on non-NAFTA members. They're planning it right now. This is what Trump is planning to do. If they do that, it will be easier to attack NAFTA, because one of the major areas of conflict is car exports, So, but it's illegal, as far as I know, to impose tariffs on Mexican cars, on Mexican-made cars, because of NAFTA. So all I'm trying to say is, I don't want to scare you. All I'm trying to say is, it's very difficult to pull out of NAFTA. It's very difficult to pull out of WTO because of financial markets. Basically, you would create financial chaos in trading relationships, and you create geopolitical risk. So I don't want to be so pessimistic and to say, the global, but it's very interesting what you mentioned about the panel of reappointments. You were saying there were 7 members in the WTO in this special panel, and now they only have 3. This is very worrying. So what I feel is that we could be moving towards a chaotic legal system for trade. Or not just that, geopolitically, we may be moving, because we are the partners of the US, and they're betraying us. And exactly. So I think the more he does that, the more political capital he's going to lose. I can't imagine the Republican Party being anti-trade. That's all I can tell you. So he could be impeached for that simple reason. But again, this is very uncertain. We don't know what might happen, but I don't want to go as far as to say that he's going to get rid of NAFTA. because I also find that very difficult to see, you know.
Right.
But I don't know, that's just, you know, that's,
Yeah. I mean, as they say, you know, whenever we talk about US or what Trump is going to do in the future, all it would take is a single tweet.
exactly.
Right?
Yeah.
He sends a tweet and off we go out of NAFTA. However, there must be some reasons as to why it has not happened so far. I mean, the guy came into the Oval Office, and withdrew in the first 15 days from the Paris climate change deal. And then in the next 10 days withdrew from Trans-Pacific Partnership.
No,
He wants to
his
return.
opening
Well,
speech. He
oh yeah,
right
he made
away
a point.
he said America first, and the rest of the world I don't give a, you know.
That's right. And so he has impulsively taken the decisions he wanted to take and withdraw from the agreements he wanted to withdraw. But of course, withdrawing from agreements such as NAFTA and World Trade Organization are not just going to hit the neighboring countries like us, but it's massively going to hit the US. And who in the US? Not the government really, but the consumers in the US. So, of course, this was in Brexit, because it is going to have a huge reciprocal effect and a damaging one at the same. But as we say, when it comes to the US and the Oval Office at the moment, there's nothing to be forecasted. I mean, you have to keep a good tab on the Twitter feeds of Trump and pray for the best.
I think if I can just, you know, say that my last comment is the congressional elections do not make things easy for Trump.
Yeah.
Because the Chinese, the Germans, and probably even Mexico are geo-referencing, and this is the word, my friends, geo-referencing tariffs on potential regions in the US. So you attack me with your steel tariffs, I'm going to target the grassroots that are voting for you in Minnesota. That's what the Chinese and the Germans are going to do.
That's a very
They're
interesting
going to say,
point.
okay, give me the regions. Give me your 20 regions in California, and I'm going to target them, and you're going to lose your congressional elections. And forget about your Congress, because it's going to go to the Democrats. So it's not that simple to start a trade war at this point. If he wins Congress, if he passes the congressional elections in November, then forget about your WTO. There will be a lot of chaos. But it's very likely that he will lose Congress, and then impeachment will come, or something's going to happen, and they're going to tell him, look, we want to keep NAFTA. Because even the Democrats support NAFTA. They're also divided,
Yeah.
you know. And my last point is globalization. They push for globalization. They pushed us to go into GATT. They pushed us to go into NAFTA. There is no grassroots movement in Mexico to get into NAFTA. It was, on the grassroots level, there was no support for free trade because the countryside here was obliterated, and that's why we have so much crime. Part of that, because the countryside in Mexico has collapsed in some regions. Okay, so now we're in the globalization sphere, and now they're telling us, oh, this is no good. You know, now we're going to go back to what we had before. That's what they're saying. But I think that, I think maybe we need to be more optimistic, Ricardo. I think maybe free trade will survive.
And I am.
For the wrong reasons.
And that's why I congratulate Amrita's book, because it's like a candle in the wind, you know. I see it like that.
Exactly why I had it up.
I wish there was maybe you should consider
Translation, yeah. We are considering its translation in Spanish. So hopefully in the next 6 months we might have the same version.
If you want, I can make only that thing about the term.
Right, of course I'll consult you as and when the project starts, Ricardo. But perhaps we can get some questions.
Yes, of course. If there's someone who would like to say something or comment about world trade, free trade, India, Mexico, yeah, please, por favor, señor.
Buenas tardes, mi nombre es Jaime Rivera. De la Facultad de Filosofía y Letras. Lo voy a hablar en español para ser un poco más preciso.
Por favor.
Sí.
Puso un buen ejemplo García, el doctor García, de Bachoco y Pilgrims. Yo creo que esa misma dependencia económica es la que se aplica para todos los productos o todo el comercio mexicano, ¿no? Y creo que en ese sentido hay mucho temor de los mexicanos de que el NAFTA, pues esa dependencia o esa antiemancipación del comercio mexicano. ¿Cuál es su visión de Bagri con su visión del mercado de los BRICS o de China o de India, que tienen una población más gigante, acerca de que México no pueda emanciparse o tenga más capacidad de producción y recursos naturales, económicos o recursos humanos y no los pueda utilizar, ¿no? Tomando como ejemplo
Para la doctora Bajari, ¿no?
Bueno, abierta,
So
¿no?
what do you think about the dependence that Mexico has with the U.S. in terms of economic and trade?
¿Puedo responder en inglés? Sí. So what I think is that I think it's a very good question. Thanks for that. So basically, I always say that whenever I get the occasion of talking about NAFTA, I always say that NAFTA has done very good and very bad to Mexico. Very good because, of course, it opened up the economy and it brought in a lot of foreign direct investment and whatnot. And it contributed to the trading stakes and the aggregate trading shares we have in the world today as an emerging economy. But bad because it has made us over-reliant on the US. It has made us dependent on the US. However, this threat that we are now facing from our neighbors is actually working for the good of Mexico. How? Because ever since Secretary of the Economy and Mexico have started renegotiating NAFTA with the US and Canada, they have really tried to pack their bags and diversify their trade. So they have now started going to various South American and Central American and European countries and even Asian countries. And you won't believe, in a single month, Mexican Secretary of the Economy officials would go to more than 7 countries to have bilateral trade negotiations on how they can improve and enhance their trade with various countries. So what is this? What are we seeing here? We are looking at a massive diversification of trade that Mexico has started initiating after receiving the threat that there might not be NAFTA anymore. And you'll be glad to know that in the past 1 year, Mexico has successfully concluded bilateral trade negotiations with more than 8 South American and Central American countries. It is in very serious negotiations with India, with China, with Japan, with South Korea. It is in very serious negotiations with the EU. So every now and then, I have various friends in Secretary of the Economy. So at the Facebook, every now and then I see them, visiting Brussels, the European Commission headquarters, and them coming to us for various trade talks. So yes, the result is positive. I'm quite optimistic. I'm optimistic because Mexico has taken this jolt given by the US, by Trump's regime, in a positive sense, by trying to diversify trade. And I think that's the way to go.
A mí me gustaría nada más hacerle un comentario al respecto. Yo creo que su pregunta, lo interesante de su pregunta es que tiene varias perspectivas. Y podríamos tener una respuesta, como creo que se le acaba de dar a Amrita, desde un punto de vista estrictamente económico, pero también incluso filosófico. Yo creo que aquí podríamos tener una postura extremadamente económica, y aquí la respondería mejor David. ¿Cuáles son los beneficios del libre comercio? O sea, hay que pensar en nuestro país, durante mucho tiempo tuvo un sistema, algunas voces quieren regresar a ese sistema de sustitución de las importaciones. El Estado mexicano hacía bicicletas, ¿sí? O sea, hay que recordar cuáles eran las opciones que tenía uno como consumidor en los años 80, 70, digo, de ahí surge la famosa palabra de la fayuca, ¿no? O sea, la fayuca la veíamos como el santo grial, ¿no? Y llegaban los jeans de fayuca, y llegaban los tenis de fayuca, y hoy en día tenemos todo eso aquí en el país. ¿Debido a qué? Al comercio internacional. O sea, hay que decir las cosas como son. Si está bien o está mal, simplemente usted saliendo de aquí de Ciudad Universitaria va a tener la opción de McDonald's, Burger King, Carl's Jr. y no sé qué tanta cosa ya hay ahora. Si está bien o está mal que estén estos restaurantes en el país, no voy a entrar a ese tema. Pero hay que recordar que en los años 80 ir a comer una hamburguesa en el primer McDonald's que estaba aquí, no lejos de aquí, de Picacho, era como era la gran fiesta. Y había colas, porque el mexicano quería probar una hamburguesa de McDonald's. Y hoy en día la apertura económica de México ha permitido eso. Ahora, si está bien o está mal, ya desde un punto de vista filosófico, consumista, bueno, pues yo diría aquí que nos podríamos pasar el resto de la noche hablando de ese tema, ¿no? Y podríamos hablar, pues incluso del último, El Capital del siglo XXI de Tomás Piketty, en qué tema estamos hablando del libre comercio. No sé, yo creo que esa respuesta que usted lanzó, y no sé si fue con una especie pues sí, de provocador, creo que es una pregunta muy complicada de responder, y la manera más, digamos, políticamente correcta es, creo que como se lo contestó Amrita, ¿no? Es una realidad que el comercio, por eso empecé mi intervención diciendo que ninguno de los candidatos, hasta el Bronco que dice que hay que cortar manos, o el señor López que es puntero, ha dicho que quieran tronar al Tratado de Libre Comercio. O, bueno, obviamente no hablan del OMC, pero ahí está, sabemos que ahí está la OMC, ¿no? Y nuestro enfoque básico es el NAFTA.
En el segundo debate lo que se veía es que ellos están muy preocupados por las remesas, porque es una cantidad muy gigante de dinero. ¿Por qué México se preocupa por tener dinero y no producir? Cuando sabemos que los productos de calidad se quedan en el extranjero, ¿no? Entonces estamos como los pueblos que mandan a los ciudadanos a las capitales, y ya nada más los que quieren mandan un poquito de dinero a su pueblo. México quiere dinero, pero no se preocupa por producir, por activar la economía. Los centroamericanos no les interesa venir a quedarse en México, quieren pasar a Estados Unidos, porque saben que aquí no hay una producción. Entonces, eso me hace pensar en un tema de cuando la Nueva España exportaba el oro y la plata a España, y España tenía dinero y no producía sus naves, se las compraban los nórdicos, y los nórdicos le vendían las naves viejas o lentas. Cuando España se llevaba el oro, la plata, se las atracaban porque México no producía, entonces, España no producía naves. Aquí es lo mismo, México no tiene la producción o la mercancía de calidad, simplemente quiere el dinero, como España el dinero, ¿no? Entonces, una dependencia tecnológica, económica, y no se preocupan los gobernantes por tener la producción de calidad, sino el dinero para consumir y exportar mano de obra.
De que muchas de las exportaciones mexicanas no son mexicanas realmente. Prácticamente para exportar tú tienes que importar muchísimo insumos, y entonces eso beneficia a Estados Unidos a tal grado que nosotros importamos más de Estados Unidos que Japón o que Alemania juntos. O Imagínense la importancia que tenemos nosotros para Estados Unidos. ¿Qué sucede? Que el NAFTA surge cuando Estados Unidos ya no puede competir con Europa y con Asia, y ahora menos. Porque como dice Ricardo, el NAFTA empieza en los 90s y al finales de los 90s, en el 2000, China entra con el beneplácito de Estados Unidos y la globalización les ganó más terreno, o sea, hizo que perdiera Estados Unidos más terreno, porque ya Estados Unidos participa en o sea, no solo está mega endeudado, sino que tiene participación en el comercio mundial la más baja de su historia, que no la ha recuperado. O sea, no tiene nada que ver con 1945, cuando se crea el GATT, o en esa época, ¿no? O sea, Estados Unidos ya está relativamente perdiendo terreno. ¿Y qué hace? Lanza el NAFTA, porque dice, de esa manera bajo costos de producción. Ya no puedo tener estos costos de producción pagando salarios altísimos a los ingenieros, a los trabajadores de Estados Unidos. Entonces, ¿qué dice? Vámonos a México. ¿Por qué? Porque de esa manera puedo competir. Y lo lograron, porque General Motors se recuperó gracias al mercado mexicano. No solo del lado de comprar autos de General Motors, también del lado de la producción, de los costos de producción. Y les ha funcionado muy bien al capital estadounidense, a la industria, hasta que llegó Trump. ¿Por qué sucede? Que hubo gente, como en México, que no se benefició del comercio internacional. La globalización les está llegando también a ellos. Y la gente de Detroit y la gente de Pensilvania que votó por él son los trabajadores que perdieron empleo, ¿no? Entonces ya les llegó también a ellos los efectos del libre comercio, los que ellos pregonaban por décadas. Y por eso llega Trump. O sea, si Trump no existiera, lo hubieran inventado, en otras palabras. ¿Por qué? Porque ya estaban las condiciones. Entonces yo veo, para repetirles, muy difícil que nos salgamos del NAFTA, porque les conviene a ellos. Lo que pasa que no todo el mundo en Estados Unidos se beneficia de la misma manera, ¿no? O sea, Estados Unidos tiene la tasa de desempleo más baja desde hace mucho tiempo. O sea, está muy bien la tasa de desempleo, está muy baja, pero a nivel regional es muy alta. Y ahí es donde el NAFTA no les gusta. Eso es lo que pasa. Y nos están echando la culpa a nosotros, pero si tú ves los números, nosotros estamos importando muchísimo, mucho más que muchos países líderes a nivel comercial. Eso es todo lo que yo quería agregar.
Bueno, pues se nos ha agotado el tiempo. Agradecemos mucho en primer lugar a la doctora Bajari, y al doctor García de la Rosa y al doctor Bonilla por haber participado en esta mesa. Gracias también a ustedes por su tiempo.
Gracias.